Good morning and welcome to the 25th meeting of the Health and Sport Committee in 2019. We have received apologies today from Sandra White. Bob Doddis is attending as substitute member, and from Alex Cole-Hamilton. Can I ask everyone in the room please to ensure that mobile phones are off or on silent? And while it is acceptable to use mobile devices for social media within the room, please do not take photographs or record proceedings as we do that for ourselves. The first item on the agenda is to take further evidence as part of the committee's inquiry on primary care. We will take evidence from two panels this morning. The first will focus on the role of technology in the delivery of primary care, and I welcome to the committee Scott Heald, Associate Director, Data Management Information Services Division Scotland, Lynn Huckerby, Director of Service Development at the NHS 24, Jeff Huggins, Director of NES Digital Service, Challinor Shute, the Chief Technology Officer with Digital Health and Care Institute, and William Edwards, eHealth Director at NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Can I kick off by asking witnesses, first of all, whether it's your view, your experience, that a Once for Scotland approach is being carried forward across Scotland, and how far it is true that there continues to exist significant variation at board or area level. And I'm open to answers from any or all witnesses to get us underway. William Edwards.
Yeah, Convener, I think it's important to say that there's been subsequent strategies in place around technology in Scotland for a number of years. And I think there's been an aspiration to set the strategic context at a national government level. And within that context, each of the health boards have had to move forward their digital and technology agenda within a framework. The framework is largely centred around a set of outcomes, and each of the health boards have had to work to those outcomes. I do recognise that there is variation across Scotland. Now, I can only speak from Greater Glasgow and Clyde perspective and my knowledge of other boards, but there is variation around the use of technology within each of these boards. I think the important point to note is the government have now carried out a digital maturity assessment, and that digital maturity assessment will then lead to improvements or concerted efforts to raise the use of technology in certain areas across health board boundaries, and that might focus into primary care as a whole, or it might look at the acute environment or data sharing that needs to exist to support tertiary referrals, or indeed the elective centres programme.
Thank you very much. Jeff Huggins and then Lynn Huckerby.
Yes, I think it's eminently sensible that we should be thinking about technology to support health and care on a Once for Scotland basis. I think that's the direction that the strategy set when it was published in April of 2018, and I think that continues to hold. We are a population of 5.4 million people. It's a size which is good for many things. It's good for clinical care, it's good for research, but I would say that it is exactly the way to go. In terms of the question as to whether we're getting there and how quickly we're getting there, I think we see two forces in play. One is to try and mitigate the challenges of running the current system with the current technology, and that tends to involve a lot of work to address interoperability and data sharing and data transfer, and that probably feels like maintaining the existing system, but it's things that we need to do. But alongside that, we then have to work on the platform and the work at national government to actually begin to take us closer towards that Once for Scotland approach, and that's the work that we're doing with the platform, with boards, with national entities.
Lynn Huckerby.
Convener, I agree. I think the Once for Scotland approach is absolutely the right approach, and I think there are lots of great examples, and again, speaking from an NHS 24 perspective, some great examples of products and services that have really transitioned from projects to scale, so such as NHS Inform, some of the work that we're doing around primary care digital services, for example. I think there is something in our approach in terms of how we design services and take forward engagement with our citizens, because it is absolutely about how we engage and co-design and develop together with the public. I think there is certainly a will across the system to develop Once for Scotland, but I think taking on board community needs, individual needs, is a really important aspect to that.
Thank you very much. Scott Heald, followed by Colin.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I might, if I may, bring in a kind of information aspect to this, which kind of is our kind of remit within the ISD. And I completely agree around the Once for Scotland being a kind of sensible approach. When it makes sense to do it once, we should be doing it once. I think that what we've found, and it's primarily on the back of the new GP contract, that we have a lot more staff now based locally working with the local GP clusters. I think what's important to recognise is that often the priorities vary across the country. So what we're trying to do is to tailor our services to support kind of appropriate local working at cluster level. But when it's appropriate to then do it at national level, to do it at national level. So we essentially have a mixed economy of local teams and national teams. And so when we're hearing that there's lots of kind of commonality across the local landscape, we then feed it into the national team so that we do it once across the country. So, but I do think it's important to recognise that the priorities for each individual local area are not necessarily the same. So we need to take that into account when we're thinking this through.
Thank you very much. John Richard.
So yeah, I would agree absolutely with what's been said before. I guess there's a little bit of nuance that we would hope people would start using around the Once for Scotland kind of mantra, which is that there are many infrastructures and assets that we should do Once for Scotland. But as Lynn was describing, there is a diverse range of users and groups and regions, each with, you know, different needs from the experiences of digital and digital services. So, you know, someone might be on a cancer care pathway in one part of Scotland, and another person might have you know, multiple learning difficulties in another area of Scotland. And so we need to be able to flex the actual experience, but using the same plumbing, if you like, the same core assets. And so, yeah, absolutely would reinforce that. We just need to figure out where the line is. What are the core assets, like the National Digital Platform stuff, like, for example, NHS Inform having a core set of quality assured guidance that everyone uses. You know, those are things that are absolutely critical on a Once for Scotland basis. The user experience, I would argue, could flex depending on need.
The independent external expert panel last year suggested that Scotland had not, up to that point, had a coherent national approach in these matters. Is the sense of the panel, is it fair to say from those initial responses, the sense of the panel is that we're getting there? Is that fair? William Edwards?
Yeah, I think we are getting there. I think there's been a number of new initiatives, such as the launch of the National Digital Platform. I think that will create a central infrastructure that allows us to collect information and make it available across Scotland. Up until now, data has largely been held at a board, health board economy type level, so this will provide opportunities in that space. I think there's been a recent commitment by Scottish Government to put in place a senior role at the government that will oversee digital reform. So I see that as a useful step forward. And I think obviously the work around the digital maturity assessment will get us to a level where we should see a reasonable standard of digital technology across all boards, regardless of boundaries.
Jeff Huggan.
Yeah, I spent the day a couple of weeks ago with Professor Bengoa, who was one of the members of the expert panel, and we talked through where we'd got to in terms of the development and the architecture, and he was very positive in terms of the experience on that. He said it reflected the sort of modern technology that you would expect to see within a system of Scotland's size. I think the challenge then becomes that we move from the policy, strategy and design phase into the implementation and the execution phase, and the implementation and the execution is really where the real work gets done, and where the challenges now lie.
Thank you very much. Bob Doris.
Thank you very much, Convener. I was listening to that with interest. I'm just looking at from my briefing here. I see NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde absolutely see the benefit of all of this. You see it underpins the work of professionals and agencies, but it goes on to say models of care will also need to adapt to take advantage of that, and there are some key enablers which are required to support this, including robust information sharing agreements. Now, I kind of think I know what that means. What would be quite helpful would be to have a concrete example of maybe where you think information sharing agreements are not robust enough at present, and how changing those can actually improve the care. Because when I speak to my constituents, they don't want to hear about these arrangements. They want to know how the actions that are taken will actually benefit their patient journey.
William Edwards.
So I suppose the journey we've been on up until now is making sure that the appropriate information is available to those who need it to provide care to our citizens. I looked with interest at the principles for a technology-enabled health and social care service, the report that was in front of the committee by the health professionals working in primary care, and I thought that was a really useful report, because what it did, it outlined what is required in terms of access to information, ready access to information for primary care practitioners to make a real difference to the patient journey. I think if we look at that, it also outlined that basic summary, healthcare summary data that is collected in acute and the GP practice should be made available to wider practitioners such as dentists and pharmacists. And I suppose when I look at actually making that happen, there's a number of steps you have to go through with the current framework around information sharing. So if I take my own board, for example, we have 6 health and social care partnerships. So we have to put in place data sharing arrangements between 6 local authorities to enable information to seamlessly flow to those clinicians who need it. If I look at the general practice landscape, we have 240 general practitioners within Glasgow and Clyde, and again we would have to put a data sharing agreement in place with each of those. Now the desire to do that is there, but that's quite a cumbersome process in terms of the agreements that need to be set up and put in place before technology can do the job that technology can quite easily do.
Sorry, I wonder if Jeff Higgins was wondering.
Yeah,
Clearly, some of what's being described there is the function of NES and of the National Digital Service.
Yeah, I think the other thing, though, that we're seeing is that we're probably moving away from a model which is of data sharing, whereby I send the data which I hold about somebody to somebody else, to the idea that we need to get to the point at which appropriate clinicians with appropriate access effectively have read-write access to a record which they need to see, and that begins to change the model and the way of thinking about it, in that, because at the moment we have data sitting in all these different pockets, you do need to move the data around if somebody else is going to see that data, whether it's sending it as a PDF or sending it electronically in some other format. The objective we have to get to is that there's a core data set which relates to the individual, which then has appropriate governance around it, so that if I'm in a care home, residential care home setting, or if I'm in A&E, or if I'm in secondary care, I can see the appropriate information which I require to offer you excellent clinical care. And I think that requires a different way of thinking about information governance. And some of the work that we've seen and some of the work that NSS is doing around Office 365 also supports us in getting us towards that.
So I guess I was just going to build on William's example from, say, community pharmacy. Just so we don't get too focused on the kind of the data sharing component or the kind of the data architecture. There's also a kind of capacity building exercise that needs to happen in concert with that. Community pharmacy, by and large, are not set up to contribute to clinical records in the way that we might want them to. So, for example, if you go get your blood pressure checked, which is part of the shift to the balance of care, you can do in a pharmacy. You'll get given it on a post-it note to walk away with, and then the GP will then take a new reading when you go to see them. So there's not actually been a win for anyone. So I think that there's a piece of work that needs done, which is the community pharmacy organisations need to have a capacity to say what they can contribute and what they would like to see in order to make those agreements happen in the first place, if that makes sense. Whereas I think in the past they've been off to one side, and they've to an extent we've been waiting for some sort of clinical record of power to exist that they will then have full access to, which I think, as Jeff was describing, is not the way it would work.
Bob Doris.
I think that's very helpful. It makes, first of all, Mr. Edwards gave some concrete examples of how that information needs to be used, and I think Mr. Huggins was helpful for me when you turned it around and said it's not about information sharing, it's about access to the relevant data for the right professional at the right time, and building up that overall picture of essential information for a patient to support them at whatever point in their journey, depending on who they're engaging with. And I think some of my colleagues will look at ownership of data in a second, so I don't wish to explore that in my follow-up question. But what I do want to do is I want to look at the report of the independent external expert panel, who were essentially saying, from the briefing I've got in front of me, that we're quite good at collecting this data in a health service sense, but there's a weakness or a lack of expertise in how we consistently capture that by local authority, never mind in a Once for Scotland approach in terms of social care. So I wonder if someone could be put on record some of the barriers in relation to capturing that data in a consistent format in a kind of social care environment, and how we might start to kind of address some of those issues.
Scott Heald.
Offer a perspective from what we've been doing in ISD. So we have actually, for the first time, begun collecting social care data at individual levels. So that's now underway. I think two challenges in all of that. One, the kind of infrastructure locally in local authorities to collect the information in the first place, and to collect it in a consistent format has been challenging. And I think that that's led us to rethink about the ways that we, I suppose, prescribe the types of data that we'd like to see being collected and used, and we've moved to much more of a focus on using what's available locally. And we've been successful, so we've now got social care data at individual level from 31 of the 32 local authorities. We've got data aggregate level for the other local authority. And we've now been able to successfully link that data to health data to kind of give some examples of kind of pathway analyses that we can do around kind of what's happening between social care and the health service. So I think that there's barriers around kind of capacity in local authorities to do it. And the other major barrier we had was around the information governance. So kind of as William was describing for Glasgow, we've had to put in place quite numerous kind of data sharing agreements between local authorities, health boards and NSS to allow that kind of sharing and transfer of data to happen. Although what we've found is, having done it once, it's proven to be much more straightforward to kind of carry on doing it on a recurring basis. So I think having kind of cracked it the first time, we've made progress, and we're now seeing the dividends of that.
Very much. William Edwards.
And to really make a point, and it was probably tied to the earlier question by Mr Doris, it's around the fact that even if we do look at how we might do things differently, the current legislative framework would require us to seek agreement and sign-off of the data sharing agreements from each of the bodies, if you like, in its current form anyway. As Scott's alluded to, it has become easier. So once you've agreed a data sharing agreement with one local authority or one health and social care partnership, then in Glasgow our approach would be to replicate that same agreement across all the partnerships. I suppose, again, we also share these agreements across other entities throughout Scotland to ensure that we're not all reinventing the wheel. There's just another point to note is there's a difference between, I suppose, the data that ISD would collect in terms of performance data around how health and social care partnerships might be performing versus the data that we need to make available to our frontline clinicians and those who require to be passed the baton of care. So if I give you a real life example in terms of the work in Glasgow and Clyde, we have a programme in place, Moving Forward Together, which is a board-owned initiative with the 6 health and social care partnerships, and it's to try and redesign services that we currently have to what they need to be like for the future. So with that, we now use the data sharing that's in place with social care and the social work systems across the 6 partnerships to therefore make data available and to the acute sector, which then allows the acute sector to make decisions around discharge planning, whether there's home care packages in place and so on. So it's just important to realise that that's the kind of desire that the boards and the partnerships are moving in. But again, it's back to this point that there's variation in terms of the use of technology across each of the board areas.
Thank you very much. And a brief supplementary from George Adam.
Yes, it's just purely, good morning, thank you, Convener. It's purely from my own, so I understand where we're going with this. I'm just trying to work out, you know, I like the metaphor you used on the idea of the plumbing's already there, because effectively the metaphor is you've got the house built, the plumbing's there, it's more difficult to adapt that. So just for my own interest, you know, the public sector's never been great at delivering IT systems and kind of being able to access, but you've already got systems in place. How challenging is that for all of you to actually deliver that? You know, how challenging, how difficult is that? Just so I can get in my own head how the challenge you face.
I mean, I'm not delivering operationally, so that's the caveat. We're an innovation centre, but I think the challenges are not so much technical ones as we have a big legacy estate. We've procured these services for 5-10 years, so you have there's no such that you can't just switch over to a new thing. You know, there's always a lag time, there's always a delay, and I guess it's trying to build the plane while flying it. So you need the information sharing agreements between all this web work of different organisations now, because we need this now. But at the same time, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to create a national clinical data repository, create the data once, and then make sure that social care can contribute to and read from that, as Jeff described, with the right permissions, etc. You know, instead of figuring it out 32 times. You know.
Huckabee.
So from a practical perspective, NHS 24 has been working with East Lothian Health and Social Care Partnership in delivering services differently in supporting same-day access to primary care. And whilst NHS 24 has a very robust infrastructure from a technical point of view, clearly the GP systems in place vary across the country, and also in terms of integrating any data sharing has been extremely challenging. One which we have worked around, however, you know, aspiring to the outputs of the National Digital Platform, I think really is a focus for us in terms of how we can integrate that technology and those opportunities to practically make a difference.
Jeff Huggins.
I don't think we should underestimate how difficult it is. You know, the country that has probably moved its technology most quickly across Europe in the last number of years has been Estonia, and they were able to do so because they didn't have a system. So when you have a system, it is remarkably hard to change how that system operates and functions. I think the other side to note is that while you've described this as a public sector challenge in delivering technology, nearly all the technology that we have in some shape or form has been delivered by the private sector under contract. And I think there's a greater role for the public sector to have in controlling and managing its own technology in a different way in the future. So I think many of our problems are because we are having to interact with many different vendors who are producing technology for many different markets. And then we have to then assemble that and construct that in such a way that locally it works to deliver good quality care. We need a different model of technology, and that's what the strategy sets out. But please, this is remarkably difficult, and we should still do it. But it is not an easy job.
A further brief supplementary, Emma Harper.
Yes, I'm aware that there's European funding, Interreg money for Ayrshire, Dumfries and Galloway, and I think it's Northern Ireland, to look at community digital technology implementation. So it's CoSync and Empower that's been tested. So does that create a bit of a disparity across other areas? Because that is EU funding that it'll run out once we come out of the EU. But then how does that promote the Once for Scotland approach then, if different models are being tested elsewhere using other funding?
Very fair question, Jeff Huggins.
We see quite a lot across the system of different funding streams. So in addition to that, we also see programmes like CivTech or Innovate UK, work from the Chief Scientist Office. So there are many multiple funders, not just European funding, going into the system and supporting either innovation or technology development across the country. And that is one of the challenges I think that we currently face. These wider national and international organisations don't coordinate between themselves, and they fund for good reason. But I think it's adding to the complexity of the situation, while at the same time, giving knowledge and understanding with where the localities which it takes place. So it's a double-edged sword.
Okay. John Nutchut and then Huckabee.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So obviously we as an innovation centre, constantly looking for funding from beyond Scotland, and I guess the only thing we can do to help is follow the standards set, understand how we would ultimately interoperate as part of an architecture for Scotland, and try and guide individual clinicians, individual businesses, research organisations, universities, charities, who by and large will want to follow their own nose and innovate, I guess. And if you want economic development as part of this, then we don't want to stop that. But at the same time, there is a role for CivTech, SPRI, and DHI, other innovation centres, to start applying the standards at the point of submitting for money, so that the things that then come over the fence, that they're not kind of notes tied to a brick that are kind of thrown at Jeff. Basically, we kind of need to get to a place where we have bid and the understanding that it will integrate with our approach.
Then Huckabee.
Convener. In specific response to the question around Empower and the directly, we are aware of that programme of work, and so from a national perspective, important that we use NHS Inform and other products, national products and services that are available that complement that work. I think the point I was keen to make was that evaluation is key out of all of the programmes and multiple tests of change, proofs of concept that are happening across the country. And if we can evaluate effectively and take the learning from that, I think helps build a picture of you know, the need and how we need to develop and improve.
Very much. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Convener. I think I probably should refer members to my register of interest in that. I'm still director of a company developing communication collaboration platforms and health, including the healthcare sector. Good morning to the panel. Can I just ask, first of all, that within the GMS contract in relation to data controllers, do you think the provision is there and does, to allow and encourage data sharing as it currently stands?
This is the provision that includes health boards as joint data controllers with GPs. William Edwards.
I would think that the new contract is certainly allowing for a dialogue to take place that probably wasn't taking place before. So if you look at information sharing that comes from general practice to the wider health economy, it's largely only allergy and prescribing information that's shared with clinicians across the wider health economy. What we're now starting to see now, as a result of the provisions of the GMS contract, is that there's much more of a dialogue now taking place with local LMC and SGPC around what would a wider data set look like and what would the roles of others within the wider primary care team be in terms of contributing towards that healthcare record and providing care to the patient population.
Scott Heald.
So yes, so I would kind of echo what Williams said there. I mean, I think looking at the provisions being made in the contract around simplifying, I guess, the data sharing landscape, I think understanding why it's there in the first place around facilitating, as William was saying, kind of greater access for the multidisciplinary team to the records and the data is really, really important. And I think it's about trying to make the information governance an enabler rather than being seen as a barrier. And one of the challenges is, I mean, there is law, there's legalities around what we can and can't do. And I think what it's trying to do is to simplify that within Scotland, and the work that was done did get advice from the Information Commissioner's Office around kind of the appropriateness of the kind of joint data controller status between the general practitioners and the health boards. So I think it's a step in the right direction. As William says, it wasn't there before, it's there now, and I think the dialogue needs to continue between the local LMCs and the health boards and the GPs.
Jeff Huggins.
Yeah, I think it's I don't think the main issue here in terms of availability and use of data is around IG. I think the main challenges here are in two other areas. The first is in respect of the technology and the capability to actually make data available in a way that is then usable in other areas, either as a contribution or as part of other technology. And with the future contract, the new GPIT systems, I'm hoping that becomes more straightforward. The other component, I think this is probably the most significant component, is some of the behavioural issues in respect of this. So when we speak with general practitioners and primary care, quite often we still get a sense that they consider this to be data that they hold on behalf of their people. And there's very much a nervousness of that information then being available to other clinicians or other areas of work. Whether because they're not sure that it may include, and this is the example which is often given, it may include information about the family that they don't want to share within the record, or it may include information which they're concerned could be put to a purpose that they don't want. The other one, which is also interesting in the context of the the integration agenda and the change agenda, is that there's a nervousness if data was more able to flow between different sectors, that one of the consequences of that might be, for example, that if I get a test in secondary care and that test results available, that could simply be pushed out to a GP to give the result back to the citizen rather than being a further outpatient appointment. Now, we can all see why it would be sensible to do that. At the same time, there's a nervousness around workload and resourcing, and that the system's actually reflecting that work might be done in different ways. So I think these issues are the real issues that are going on in terms of this agenda, and the IG is quite an easy way of explaining why it's difficult.
William Edwards.
I would probably disagree slightly with that. I suppose I look at the position I hold within Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and I don't actually think the technology is a huge barrier to making information accessible to those who need it, and also for those who need to contribute to it. So as I said, within our board area, we're currently looking to agree with the LMC a wider data set. I suppose what would be helpful would be if that wider clinical information was agreed at a national level, and there was an easier mechanism as opposed to signing off various data sharing agreements, then that could become part of our board's electronic health record. Just to give you an idea of the size and scale, so within GG&C we have over 25,000 users who are currently active users of the board's electronic health record. They access information from 3 of our 6, seamlessly from 3 of the 6 health and social care partnerships, and our health board is federated to the other boards in the west of Scotland and indeed the north of Scotland to support tertiary referral patient flows. So the ability to make information available to those who need to see it is the technology at the moment would allow that to happen. But some of the dialogue is around who's appropriate to see what, if you like. And I think I've found the work of this committee quite useful because it's given me a different perspective from people like community dental practitioners and community pharmacists. And we are actually moving forward access to all community pharmacists within Greater Glasgow and Clyde to our immediate discharge information that comes from all the acute hospitals. And again, some early evidence would suggest that has made some real positive impacts to patient care, where there was discrepancies around prescribing and so on. So there's some good patient safety stories in there, providing you have the right access to those who need access to the data.
Brian Whittle.
A couple of quite interesting questions I think come out of this, and I think gets to the crux of it really, is that to get one, who should own the patient data, I think is central to this. And following on from that, then, from what you said yourself, William Edwards, is can you create a system where you have levels of access to data, different levels of access to data?
In terms of the electronic health record within Greater Glasgow and Clyde, it's all role-based access. So depending on the various different clinical reasons or your role, then you're set up with the relevant permissions and privileges. What we tend to get into debate around is what the role-based access should look like, as opposed to sometimes what is the right thing to do for the patient who presents.
Should own the data. I think that's an absolute key question in terms of, especially in terms of having the problems we have with data sharing.
Jeff Huggins first, and then come back to other witnesses, because I think this is a central question that's come up throughout the inquiry, and be interested to have the views of all witnesses. Jeff Huggins.
I think it's quite clear that the data relating to the citizen and the individual is the citizen's data. When you bring that data then together, what you then have effectively is a public asset. And that's subject to controllership either by boards or by GP practices or otherwise. But I think ownership of the data resides in the individual, and it's a component of them.
William Edwards.
I was pretty much going to echo what Jeff's just explained.
Is that a view shared by Challoner, and then, in fact, I'll take Challoner and then Scott and then Lynn.
So, sorry, this is my hobby horse, so apologies for a slightly longer answer. It depends what you mean by ownership. So, just the background of this is DHI has done around 70 different co-design projects with people and professionals across Scotland over the last 6 years. Data ownership comes up over and over again. The most often asked thing from a co-design point of view is, I want to tell my story once. That's the one message that comes out clear. And obviously, the National Digital Platform will then start to facilitate that from a clinical and professional service delivery point of view. You will hopefully, in the near term, be able to say, here is my blood pressure reading, here is my family history, and then that is reused over and over and over again, right? And for that kind of core medical data, We need the NHS to be the custodian of that data for public health purposes, for service improvement purposes, ultimately for research and new medicines and various other things. And so that's the kind of argument around the custodianship matters, and that's the people placing trust in the NHS to say that I get as an individual that putting my medical data in that pool is good for Scotland, good for me, good for my family, good for my children, etc., etc. Then there's a whole other world of data, which is predominantly owned by consumer systems, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, etc. If you want to get to a world where the health and care services we deliver are more personalised and more preventative, then we need to understand on what basis we can use the way you move about your community, your living environment. How warm is your house? Did your primary carer just move to a different city? You know, the kind of life data. And that's not necessarily something a government can collect and combine in the way we want to. There's a whole, well, I mean, I'll happily take advice on that, but I think politically it'd be a very difficult thing to create a really rich life context data set and link it with all the other data sets. So personal ownership of data, I think, matters, because if we can give people the ability outside of government systems to gather some of the other data, so not the core service data, some of their lived experience data, and make that available on a consented basis to the health and care system to help us personalize and help us prevent, we need to figure out how to create a trust and regulated environment to allow all that other data to be gathered and made useful on the person's own terms. And I can go into a lot more detail than that, but if you're interested in that, we can share some papers afterwards.
That's certainly, I think, something the committee is interested in. Scott Heald, and then...
Yeah, thank you. So again, just to, I guess, give another perspective. So the examples that William and Jeff have been touching on are really around the kind of direct kind of frontline patient care and how people can access the data that need to do that. Just offering a perspective from ISD's view, so we do collect, lots of data about what happens across the health service and social care, as we've touched on. And so we do hold lots of data, and I think it's important about the use to which the data is going to be used, and as a data controller, kind of what you can and can't do with the data that you hold. But I think a really important point is that Scotland is very rich in terms of the data it holds. So we are the envy of many other countries around the data we hold on the health service. I don't think we should lose sight of that. But the other thing that we can do is we can take effectively individual data and anonymise it so it can be used in ways that don't identify individuals, so that we can safely use data in anonymous format. So we've certainly got lots of experience within ISD around kind of how we do that to make data available in different levels of aggregation to allow that to happen. And that can help, for example, to facilitate to individual boards access to Scotland-wide data so they can see comparisons around the country. So I think there's different uses of data and different aspects of information governance that we do need to think about. But I do echo some of the points that Jeff made around it being down to individuals. This is kind of tricky territory because patient confidentiality is so important, and therefore people treat it really importantly. And I think anything we can do kind of across the country to simplify the landscape, I think is crucially important. But I don't want to create the impression, though, that we're not already sharing data and making use of data across Scotland, because we absolutely are. And although it's complex and difficult, we're trying to take steps to simplify that, but we can do that at the moment, and it does pay dividends.
My view echoes much of what's already been said, in that I do firmly believe that the data is owned by the citizen themselves. I think there is a point there, though, about patient choice in terms of levels of consent around how far and wide that data should and can be shared. And I think there's an information stroke education piece there for individuals around that. So, thank you.
Ryan Whitlam.
The flip of that, of course, is the quality of data that you get out depends on the quality of data that you put in. So I think the other question was who should be able to input into a patient record?
Chalmers Chute and then Jeff Huggins.
So in theory, the patient should be able to. And there are some trust issues around that. I'll use the example of blood pressure reading because it's a relatively simple example. If you go to Boots and buy a blood pressure cuff, a Bluetooth connected cuff that sends the data to your phone, that can currently go into Apple's ecosystem, and you can store your own blood pressure readings. And then with what we've done with Glasgow, we've shown that we can then put that into clinical systems. The issue with that is, from a clinical governance point of view, that one blood pressure reading is of unknown provenance. It doesn't follow the guidance, the nice guidance. So then what we need to start thinking about is, can we stimulate the market to make sure that the app that is used is the right app from a medically regulated device? Can we prove it was that device? And there are ways of doing that. And other things like if a patient takes the reading for a wrist-worn cuff at waist height, that's not correct. It needs to be at heart height. But we wouldn't know that from the data coming in. So there's a whole trust exercise we need to do around regulating the market, giving people choice to say, yes, you should be going and getting your own blood pressure cuff, actually. If you have a family history of cardiac and all the rest of it, you should be going and doing that. But we want it to contribute to the record so that you don't have to have lots of routine appointments just to monitor your blood pressure. But we need to make sure it's the right cuff, that you're taught how to use it, and that we understand, we can prove how it came into the system. So that's all within our gift to do. So if we do it from a patient, then there's no reason that we can't do it from a pharmacist or a social care provider, etc.
Good. Jeff Higgins.
So I think a lot of it does come down to how you clinically model the data that you hold. So the approach that we're working with is using the open air ontology, which effectively sets out the different components of data which are relevant to particular events. So blood pressure is generally the example which is used, and with that, what, in addition to the particular reading, it identifies the other components of information that would be relevant to that reading. So location, age of the person who was subject to the reading. It could be time of day. You can bring a number of different components in, but the objective of holding the data in that way as data with the metadata is it then makes it machine processable and machine readable. And in some ways that's the challenge, because quite often we see high quality data but contained within a PDF or a document or a manuscript. And while that's high quality data, there's a lot of work both then to find that and to use that data. So the challenge is to capture the data in a way which enables you to reuse it without having to reprocess it each time or mentally reprocess it each time. And that probably takes you away from some of the dominant models that we have, which are documents and PDFs and passing letters between the system. The more you can take the data into being machine processable, machine readable, the more you will be able to do with that with data. And that brings in different concepts such as patient-reported outcomes, along with maybe sensor data, along with blood pressure data, along with other forms of data that you want to be able to bring together to offer precision public health interventions.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I think another couple of aspects around this. I think the appropriateness of the data that's being collected is really important. There's a danger here we end up being awash with data, and it's really important that we understand kind of what data do we actually need to either plan and deliver services, to measure outcomes, and make sure that we can get access to that data. Again, coming from a kind of analytical world, data standards are really important, so that there are lots of recognised data standards around the types of stuff that we collect across Scotland. And there are also international standards, so around how we code diseases or operations, which again is really important that Scotland kind of adopts and uses those as we do at the moment. So that kind of relies on expertise within the health service to actually do all of that. So you can't rely on the citizen to kind of code kind of the relevant conditions around heart disease or such like. We do need some expertise in how we do that to keep it consistent. I think as has been touched on, technology can help. So, as I mentioned with the social care data, kind of our traditional approach would have been to try and define data standards that were universally applied across the country. But if that's not possible, it is possible to do the translation elsewhere, as Jeff was alluding to, so you can create the commonality across the country. So I think using data standards with technology is really important, but it's also really important that we think through what data do we need to answer the questions we've got and then collect it appropriately.
It's quite interesting. Your answer to that was very kind of along the analytical data. I think one of the questions I would ask was, for example, if you have a cancer diagnosis, you have the ability to walk into cancer cancer support and get some one-to-one sort of therapy. Now, I'm not suggesting they can see any of your patient data, but surely that intervention there, being able to input into that intervention there, would be very useful for a consultant or a GP to be able to see that. So, so it's whether a third, when I'm saying input into a patient data, in those sort of circumstances, it would be should they be able to input into the system? And
that's a really good example, because we've been doing a lot of work around data that we have around cancer across the country. So one of the areas we're looking at is kind of how we bring in data that's held by other organisations like the third sector, whose role is to support patients with particular conditions, and how can we bring in extra insight they've got into the data that we already hold nationally. So it's doable, and we need to think through. Again, it comes down to what's the purpose of having that data, and what does it add to the story that we've already got about particular patients with those diagnoses.
Briefly, William Edwards and then Charlie Mitchell.
It was really just to outline that that clinical information is collected every day, across a health board area. So for example, the area you were given there would be that the structured data would be collected regularly around cancer patients, and whether they attend the beats or whether they attend the other services provided in other health board areas. That data would be collected and made available across the board's electronic health record. I think the difference as to where we are heading now is to typically data would be collected in a structured and unstructured way within a board area and then shared across boundaries by federating electronic records. What we're now trying to do is to distinguish the data set that is required to sit at a national level. So rather than have a rich clinical data repository within a board area like Glasgow and Clyde or Lanarkshire or whatever, we would try and build a clinical data repository once for Scotland, and that's the approach that Jeff and his team have been commissioned to do, is to build that repository that then means that we can then start to make suitable data available at a national level. Around that, and that's the journey we're on. The other side, I think, is that an important step forward is the work of the National Digital Platform, is that they're looking to move forward a single point, once for Scotland, point of access for the citizen. So the ability for patients to contribute data, such as some of the examples that Chal previously provided, but then importantly that data would be collected in the National Digital Platform, but would then be made available to those users. The 25,000 users of Greater Glasgow and Clyde's electronic health record would be viewable to them almost seamlessly, and that's the kind of journey that we're trying to get to.
I'm keen that we move on. I know there was a brief supplementary from George, which I'll take, but I'm also keen that we begin to look at some of the ways forward as well as some of the barriers that have been highlighted.
Okay, it's a very practical question. It's Consul, I must be in the right committee, because my wife Stacey has 3 long-term conditions. Primary one being multiple sclerosis. Now, when we're talking on a very practical level, when her data, when she's going to primary care and accessing it, she has to go through everything, every single time that she goes when she's accessing anything. So how, in that very practical, do we get to a place where she doesn't have to do that? How do we design that system? How do we get there? And also, I'm aware that I think it's in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, there's a programme with various conditions where you get access to your consultants' details and the records that are going back and forwards, the letters and things like that. It's quite interesting as well, that kind of data sharing. I'm quite interested in hearing about that as well. And on a very practical level, again, we all have these smartwatches on. Is there any, without getting Cambridge Analytical on it, is there any way we can actually access that type of basic information that could help with people long term?
Charlton Chute, followed by Jeff.
So we, so Glasgow and we did that work, saying there's no reason, for example, why there's a referral letter between a GP and a secondary care system. There's no reason that the user can't share that same record with their family, their informal carers, to help arrange transport or whatever else we need to do. So we showed the ability to extract those core clinical assets and make them available to the family automatically to a kind of social messaging feed, almost like a WhatsApp style group, to allow the network to be activated for that person when this referral happened. So it's not just the NHS's responsibility to get you from A to B. There's a bigger circle of people there. And I guess a practical example of, I'm just going to kind of combine two of the bits, the cancer example. So Macmillan are doing a lot of work, and people have probably heard me giving evidence before around personal data stores, around the idea that I can carry my data with me. Now, I would absolutely agree that from a clinical point of view, from a core medical service point of view, and the way the NHS transacts business, a national digital platform is the way to go, because we want that single version of the clinical truth. But when you get into the other bit of the cancer care pathway, it's who's taking care of my dog when I'm in hospital, right? Or I'm going through chemotherapy, how do I get support with my exercise regime so I can be ready for surgery? Or who's going to deal with the mold in my basement so that I have a house to return to when I'm discharged. So there's a whole range of other things, and we have humidity and temperature sensing capabilities. We've got wearables, and we've got the ability to understand how your mobility is changing and all these sorts of things. That stuff is what Macmillan is looking at, and they've reached out to Glasgow City Council, to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and others, to say if the person was able to contribute their half of the story by holding it themselves and telling it once, and so back to your wife's example, can I fill in my own form about myself and do that all once, and I'll keep that up to date, and then I can consent to make that available, and then that can then be unified with what the government holds on me. Now that's a challenging interoperability query, but that's what Macmillan and British Heart Foundation and various other charities are starting to think like, because they are touching so many different organizations and trying to help that user touch 10 different health and care organizations, that's the only route they can see to get there. And so that's the kind of concept of personal data store.
Jeff Huggins.
So I think when your wife visits a clinician, the clinician should have the information in front of them that they require to offer excellent care. Two of the pieces of work that we're engaged in at the moment address a number of the challenges that you've identified. So the first piece of technology that we've developed that we'll deploy is around anticipatory care, and we'll deploy it in one location in the new year in Forth Valley as the initial alpha and beta versions of the technology, and that's intended to allow different clinicians to have access to core data about somebody's anticipatory care wishes and plans for the future, and that's requiring us to solve the problem of how the care home staff or the ambulance service or secondary care or primary care can effectively have a view onto information which enables them to do their job in the best way. Alongside that, we then have work that we've been discussing with the IHDP programme, the Innovative Healthcare Delivery Programme, which is largely focused around cancer, which is around the commitment in the 2015 cancer strategy in respect of treatment summaries. And there, what we have is a clinical consensus on a data set that should be available, and should be available both to the citizen but also the range of different people who might be involved in care. So we've agreed that we will, in the new year, begin to take forward some of the further design work around that, to identify then also within that how we might then begin to both bring it onto the platform as a national deliverable, but also as part of that think about it, do that work thinking that this isn't just going to be for this group of patients, but that the model and the technology that we develop should work then for MS or dementia or any other condition, so that effectively we're building reusable technology which the NHS in Scotland owns and controls, so that it can begin to build it out as we move forward. So those are exactly the challenges that the strategy sets out.
Thank you very much. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. Can I ask for an update on the rollout of Spire, please?
Update on
Scott
that?
Heald.
Yeah. So Spire's a system which is kind of overseen by NSS. and it's now been deployed to 96% of practices across Scotland. The remaining 4% we're still working with to get the software out into those boards, and that's mainly due to system upgrades they're having of their own local IT systems that Spire will follow on the back of. We've trained just over 1,500 people in the use of Spire across the country, so that's both GPs and practice managers, but it tends to be practice managers that are being trained in the use. And we've been focusing primarily around cluster use, around the development of local reports for use in the practice. This is essentially the software running against the data that's held in the practice. And we've got a number of examples where we've been receiving positive feedback about making the use of Spire. So one around helping with the kind of flu surveillance at this time of year. And there's another one around what's called the E-Frailty Index, which has also proved to be popular. And there was a recent report in I think it was the BMJ, which was kind of highlighting the e-frailty work we've been doing in Scotland as kind of a model of best practice around the fact we'll have this available for use in practices across the country.
David Torrance.
Could I ask what the current barriers to data collection and publication of statistics in primary care and activity are?
Yep, so that's back to me as well.
Yep.
So in terms of the barriers, I guess the barriers are kind of access to data in the first place. But probably the thing to highlight is that we have got lots of data about primary care, so prescribing, dental, and also kind of what I would call kind of the proxy measures, whereby you can kind of follow pathways from the general practice into acute care. So we actually do have a lot of data on primary care. We'll have data that we'll be able to collect through Spire on kind of what's happening within general practice itself. And we've also got work underway around collecting more detail about the workforce within primary care. But we do recognise that actually it's quite fragmented. So if you do go to the ISD website, trying to find a coherent picture about what's happening across primary care is difficult. So we're in the process of kind of looking at what we publish and how we do that. And the aim is probably around about springtime next year that we'll be kind of relaunching the data that we have available around primary care so that it's much more coherent and accessible for users.
Lynn Huckerby.
Just a practical example in terms of the barriers that we've faced in supporting primary care around demand management has been around their ability to understand the demand that's coming into the practice due to dated telephone systems and not having the robust technology available to measure that. And so we have, there has been an investment, particularly in East Lothian, where they have invested in technology that allows that baseline data to start to be collected. But I know that varies across the country.
Okay, David Torrance.
It was mentioned earlier about a national data repository. Can I ask for an update on the AHP Operation Measures project and how the information will link into other primary care data?
Who's the expert in the AHP outcome measures?
Probably am.
Scott here.
I don't know if I'm the expert, so I'm not immediately close to that particular piece of work, but what I could do is offer to find out more about it and pass it on to the committee afterwards. So it's within my area, but I'm not as close as I am to some of the other stuff that we've been talking about today.
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can move on now. Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the panel. In terms of making this a priority and driving this change, do you think health boards and other organisations actually take technology as a priority? And I asked that question specifically because last night I was looking at Professor Nora Kearney's paper, which was Scottish Government funded, to investigate, and cancer services have been raised, how we improve technology around cancer services. And everything we've discussed today, we were talking about 14 years ago. Specifically around a patient-held electronic record. So why is this not really moving forward? I think it's the frustration patients in this committee have also highlighted in the past. And I just wondered, where is that real drive of change coming from?
I suppose I can speak from my own board's perspective. I suppose technology features prominently around our health board agenda. We've got a significant commitment from the chairman, the chief executive and the non-executive board members, and they actually own and have signed off the board's digital strategy and subsequent delivery plan, which echoes the national digital strategy. Again, I mentioned earlier, the Moving Forward Together programme is our board's blueprint for redesigning clinical services, and there's a significant stream of work in the health agenda that underpins the aspirations there. So, some of the points you picked on around the ability for citizens to contribute to the statutory healthcare record, as it were, that's work that's very much underway, and we see is a need to deliver at pace. Typically, the health service was really focused on sharing information to those who needed it and needed to contribute towards a record, and those who provided frontline care. But really, what we're now trying to do is to create a set of standards that allows others to contribute from outside the statutory systems. Now, largely, that's where the work of the digital health platform needs to come into its own, and we need to see a clear roadmap for when citizens will be able to authenticate against that and other third sector organisations that would then bring together a more complete record from information generated and collected outside. The DHI have also got a role to play in this space, and again, Greater Glasgow and Clyde have worked closely with both organisations to try and move that agenda forward, because we do see that as being pivotal in terms of redesigning some of our healthcare services.
That's your cue. Tom Richard.
I'll give you a favour back, which is my answer was basically going to be, if we look at our exemplars that we point to, Estonia and Finland, these sorts of places, they spend around 5 to 7% of their budget on this agenda. If you look at the comparator in Scotland, we spend between 1 and 3%. So, you know, at a pretty fundamental level, we're paying for IT support, not digital development. You know, and the reason we work with Glasgow and other health boards is, you know, some groups have managed to stretch beyond that quite small sum to, and exerted a lot, it's like a huge amount of effort to be able to keep business as usual running and then try and change on that kind of money. And so we're attracted to that as an innovation centre because you go where the energy is, but it's hard. And just to put another comparator, most private sector corporate organisations would be spending near 10% of their budget on this. You know, so I think it's just important to note that that, and the second bit is we fund projects, but we don't maintain the outputs. So we'll get a European funding or a bit of UK money or a research grant, and we'll do this great personally held record thing, and it'll all work. And then 2 years later, we are trying to make a case to someone, we don't know who, to say, what about the next 15 years? So that's hard. So, you know, we need to bake in maintenance money more into these initiatives.
Jeff Huggins, clearly there's an element here of a national service that we're seeking.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. First of all, I'm not always persuaded that this is about the money. It's all the way in which we talk about the money in terms of digital health, as though we had the health service and then we had the digital health service. And one of the clear messages that came out of the strategy was we had to stop separating out IT from service change and service delivery. We needed to think about, as we take forward the modern outpatients work, the access collaborative work, the work on primary care modernisation, technology needs to be baked in and part of that, not a separate add-on at the end or at the side of it. And so in terms of how we think about the money simply costing the IT departments of the NHS makes no sense at all. So I would take a step back from that. I think the challenge about that is then once you're now thinking about that across a number of different programs of work where you've got different people involved with different perspectives, actually relating that back to a common architecture and a common approach to the technology is challenging without a degree of coordination and guidance, and we're beginning to, you know, that's beginning to emerge and come into place such that we can be confident about that.
Yeah, and similar to Jeff, technology absolutely needs to be seen as an enabler and not a driver. for change, and probably one of my own personal hobby horses is around the need for service design whereby our citizens are engaged in understanding their needs and requirements of a service, because by doing so, not only do you engage you know, the many in terms of our population, but also in terms of ensuring equality and getting to the needs of people who perhaps there are barriers to access just now. And the Digital Office have set a standard for Scotland in terms of the Scottish approach to service design, and that for me is a critical point at which we should be developing our services, of which digital is part and parcel of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
To go back to the point I was trying to make, it was around, you know, when we have this Once for Scotland approach, and maybe one example of that is the development of the ALICE system to link in mental health services and community. Once that gets down into GP surgeries, and we're talking about specifically sort of a digital front door for primary care in a GP setting, what does that then look like? So last week we did a piece of work here in committee with regards to social prescribing. We had a GP from the Highlands who, I think she actually in her submission said the whole ALICE system has been defunct and we don't use it. So when we do develop what is meant to be a solution, even clinicians don't have the sort of belief in that system to make it work for what we are saying is a solution. So I'm just wondering, from what you've said and what's outlined for future, how are we going to evaluate that to make sure that any spend we do put in, things actually happen? Because in 15 years' time, just like the report Professor Kearney wrote and was published in 2005, we could still be sitting talking about this and it's not actually been happening and the benefits haven't been realised.
NHS 24 have been developing over the last few years in partnership with the Alliance and Macmillan Scotland Service Directory, of which ALICE is part of that. The quality of the information that goes in is as good as the quality of information that is then made available. And so we've been working closely with the Alliance and ALICE project, particularly in terms of how we make best use of that content and how we surface that content. And we've been working with 20 of the health and social care partnerships across Scotland to make sure that the content, as far as possible, is quality assured content. And by next July, we'll have the remaining 11 health and social care partnerships on board with that. But one of the other aspects to that development is in ensuring that the content is quality assured and relevant for the population.
Jeff Huggins and then Scotty.
So I think the test that you said is exactly right, in that the technology evaluates well if people are using it and it's helping them to do the things that they want to do. And I think where that takes us is that we need to have a far higher emphasis on design, because products which are well designed, intuitive and easy to use and which help people to do things that they want to do get used. Products that don't meet those criteria don't get used, whether they clinically evaluate well or not. People will use technology that helps them more quickly than technology which is an obstacle. And that's why I guess in the work that we're seeing both from the Scottish Government with the commitment to the standard and more generally, that actually doing the work iteratively and developmentally in situations in localities becomes part of the process, because you have to find out if what you're doing is going to work or isn't going to work.
I was going to more or less make the same point. I think the other aspect of it is about developing things incrementally, so it's not just a big bang, so that people are not disappointed when they see the big bang after so many years of development. So I think definitely the design, the user input and doing it incrementally is really important.
Thank you very much. Brian.
Thank you, Convener. I'll be brief since I hogged much of the time before. I was quite interested around how you think the NDP will enable information sharing really between sort of the primary care multidisciplinary team, because I think that's the direction of travel we're moving in, and also including sort of the acute sector, and as we mentioned before, sort of social care, maybe even in third sector. How will that be an enabler?
Jeff Huggins.
Yeah, so the as members of the panels have said previously, the objective is to move towards the situation whereby different clinicians, whether in the NHS or local government, or indeed in the private and voluntary sectors, are able to have read-write access to the same data sets, but to enable them to do the different functions that they would want to do. So I guess the model which I have in my head for that is that if you drive a Volkswagen and sometimes you look inside the engine, you find that there's parts in there which say Audi on them, or they might say Skoda on them, or differently. So you've got common components which are being used across different cars, and then different components which are specific to the particular model. So our objective around the platform is that you're beginning to develop those common components, whether it's the citizen authentication or staff authentication, or how you hold and archetype the data, or messaging. And then beyond that, you're able to interact with the particular use cases that you would see on the ground, whether that's somebody visiting somebody in their own home, or it's a GP surgery consultation where you're building technology which reflects the particular workflow that needs to happen there. But that common componentry then becomes the process by which you make the joins, and alongside citizen access and staff access enables you to deliver services in a different way. Does that answer your question?
Ish.
we do a really good hour-and-a-half presentation if you want.
Okay. Not today, don't. Well, I think just quickly, I was quite interested in the DHI sort of presentation around this. I think for me, it's the sort of change management element of what you're doing. So I think it's more of a change management issue. You have more than a technology issue. Yeah. How do we adopt? How do we ensure that adoption is cascaded through to the front line? And one of the things, just to follow on from Miles Briggs said around social prescribing, I thought within this bank of available local community referral options, as you put it, as the DHI put it, it sounds great. How do we make that work?
So some of the people in the visitors gallery today have come who are from the product team, and at the moment they're spending time most weeks down on the ground in Forth Valley, sitting down with clinicians in primary or secondary care to talk through how the technology looks before it goes into the production phase, and that's a core component of ensuring that what we produce has a good likelihood of uptake without us having to demand that people use it, and that we want to develop technology that people choose to use because it works for them. The feature I think that we've identified beyond that is that we then do require a further function which is around that implementation support, which is probably more in the space of the improvement and change collaboratives, because it is very much working on a person-to-person and team-to-team basis in terms of understanding the dynamics of that, and then to think about how you do that at scale. But the common core to that is that while you might do that work in slightly different ways as you go across the country, because care is configured differently across the country, the common elements being the technology that underpins it then become uniform, and that begins to apply a degree of pressure around standardisation.
John Merchant.
Yes, in a sort of similar vein, it's quite easy to get funding for the kind of snazzy bit, which is often technology. We've been funded by Scottish Government as an innovation centre for the next 5 years. But when you ask for the change management money, it's slightly less easy, because what you're asking for are a group of effectively unaffiliated, unrestricted people whose job it is just to go and do the hearts and minds work, to get in amongst it, to spend quite a lot of time changing cultures. And it's harder to pin down outputs other than we've managed to sign up another health board, and now we've got another health board, and DHI has done this work for like PillCam, remote gastroenterology and stuff like that. Getting to 3 health boards all agreeing to do it the same way, that's hard yards, and you need dedicated people to do that. But it can take years, and so it's quite hard to invest in that, and it's hard for us to get that. So we too are kind of hoping for investment in that, in a very specific change management function that understands what's coming and prepares the ground and warms people up, recruits people into design exercises with NDP and DHI and others, creates champions, all that sort of stuff. But that is a dedicated role, and I don't think we have that right now.
Yeah. Very much, David Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks to the panel for their contribution to date, where we've looked at a lot of technical detail. Just for the record, could I ask a wider question? Clearly, at a time of climate emergency, where we're all trying to reduce carbon emissions, can the panel outline where new technology can come into play in reducing carbon emissions across Scotland, particularly in primary care?
Who would like to start with that one? Charlton Richard.
So I mean, there's the kind of thing that's right in front of us right now is with things like the Attend Anywhere scheme, right? So fairly, simple technology that basically says you do not need to move from one place to another to have the interaction. And I guess over time, we need to move out of the habit of using the appointment as the basic unit, the meeting face-to-face as the basic unit of the health and care system, because that's what we do. We say, right, if in doubt, let's book an appointment. And those appointments quite often are to exchange information. We're asking the person questions, they're contributing their needs. And well, Jeff described, in theory, we should be able to say, right, well, here's the management by exception model for someone with hypertension, and if everything's going fine, and you've got your blood pressure cuff, and you're doing your exercises, and that data is consented and made available, we can automate some analysis that says you are in the green zone, and if you move into the amber zone, only on that basis will we then start interaction. So there's a different thought process around not making people travel that we can get to when this kind of moves forward.
Lynn Huckerby.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think for us within NHS 24, there's a real drive and ambition to support extending channel choice to people who use our own services, but equally those that we are supporting out within primary care. So Chalner mentioned Attend Anywhere, but also things like web chat, messaging, etc., things that are part and parcel of what we can do in terms of extending choice for people to access services.
Okay. David Stewart.
Thank the panel for that. Can I move on into another key concept, which is the issue of the digital front door? Would the panel just outline what exactly that means and how then that's going to be evaluated, its success on the long term?
William Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, I referred to earlier our aspirations at the board around moving forward together and the reconfiguration and redesign of some of our services and how we actually move away from the historical or the current model of appointments and referrals and appointments. What we put in place in Greater Glasgow and Clyde was the ability to try and create a dialogue with citizens, particularly citizens and patients with long-term conditions. And we created an environment that was the statutory health systems are on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side we were almost trying to create a set of standards that would allow innovation and SMEs to come and disrupt how we currently look after patients with COPD, diabetes and various other long-term conditions. We actually had a digital front door in place, which we developed across all the boards in the west of Scotland, and that was a national commission that Glasgow and Clyde was given to move forward. And we proved that we were able to sign up patients across various specialties where the dialogue with our clinicians then became different, and it was a definite move away from referrals and appointments to remote management at a distance. So that was a good move forward. Where that's currently sitting now is that this capability will be delivered via the National Digital Platform. But as an organisation and our Moving Forward Together programme, we still require that to be in place now. So while it's getting moved forward at a national level, it's now capability that we no longer have. So it's really important that the digital platform delivers in this space.
Jeff Huggins.
Yeah, I think it's one of the fundamental shifts that we need to see over the next 3 to 4 years, in that the ability of the citizen to directly engage, through technology with the system, and either to do things in respect of their medication or appointments or information that they want to put back in to the system. I think what we need to do, though, is be careful that we're not seeing this from the perspective of the system itself and what the system feels that it needs, because people will use the technology if it meets the needs of people. They won't use the technology because it suits us for them to use the technology. They will use it if it helps them do something that they want to do. And for that reason, the way in which we're approaching this is, while we're beginning the work to build the technology into the platform that allows us to work with citizen access, and that's a different sort of technology than an integration layer, which allows you to pass information across into the historic systems, the legacy systems. We think what it means that you need to do to develop that is to develop it around particular use cases where the citizen is actually going through this digital front door to do something that they want to do, whether that's update something like their anticipatory care plan, or it's to have a version of their treatment summary, or whether it's to I guess provide outcome information about how the medication they're on is affecting their health. So instead of the NHS digital approach, which is to sort of put an app on the web and encourage 50 million people to download it with 3 or 4 things you can notionally do, the intention is to actually make that a rich experience so that those people who do use it and find it of value are able to use it a lot. Where
and I know there's a couple of witnesses want to add.
Jeff and his other colleagues might come back and says, do you agree it's about changing the culture? If I can take it from another example, in Highlands and Islands, as you may know, UHI does more video conferencing than all universities in the UK put together. So the norm is, can we VC into that meeting? Yep. And I found even in the Parliament, where we're pretty well equipped to that, this committee exempt, I must say, sometimes it's a struggle even to convince committees to have video conferencing, where clearly there's a big payoff in terms of convenience for witnesses and, of course, reducing the carbon footprint.
Yeah, I think there are a number of cultural issues. So one is just people's familiarity, and in that people who are familiar with the technology and confident will use it. We've certainly seen an explosion over the last year or so with some of the new technology that we're working across NHS boards in terms of doing that. Other components, though, of the culture are about the way in which clinicians or citizens expect things to work. In that, while we're talking about a change process, we also have very fixed ideas as to how a clinic works, as to the expectation to see somebody in person, and some of those are also, I would say, relate maybe historic power dynamics as well. So I think there's not just one sort of channel here that needs to change, but there's Chal talked in terms of disruption, but there's probably the most fundamental change we can make here is putting the citizen more in control of their own health. We know that is good for so many reasons, and that requires a different way of doing things. Sorry, I know you need to move on.
Right, Lynn Huckabee and then Charles.
Okay, just coming back to the earlier point around the digital front door, I think there's 2 points for me, and we are definitely seeing some early insights and early evidence that about 30% of the people that we're engaging with within primary care don't actually need to have a face-to-face appointment with the GP. And so there's a redirection there to self-care, self-management. So absolutely, in terms of digital and online access, that's critical for people. There's an education point there as well in terms of early intervention, further upstream support in terms of health and well-being is key to that.
We've given previous evidence to previous committees. The global academic literature, systematic literature review around patient portals, which is the kind of the predominant thought process, is not good. So globally, the evidence between a centralised patient portal approach and patient benefit is next to non-existent. And we are, we're not trying to do that in Scotland, but we are possibly in danger of trying to measure it as if we were. The idea that you can simply whap up someone's clinical record and give them a login and expect them to go and use it, I'll tell you about 2% will use it. And so instead, what Jeff's basically describing, I would agree with, which is no one goes on to Ryanair or Flybe to just create an account just in case. They do it because they see a flight they want to get to a place they want, and then there's a registration process as part of that, if that makes sense. I would urge us as at a political level to be very careful about applying a kind of measurement of success around the quantity of people that are logging into the portal, if you like. That it doesn't reflect the way people use digital services.
Jeff, sorry, let Jeff Huggins respond to that.
A very quick point. I think the intention about having that different relationship with the citizen is to be able to do things that we can't currently do, rather than do things that we currently do digitally. And that's why it has to be part of the process by which you're creating and using data in a different way. And we're seeing this happening across the world with chatbots and triage systems and things like that, which are designed to enable people to get to an answer that they're comfortable with more quickly, rather than simply channel them faster into the existing system, because the system is challenged as it is. So adding another channel whereby more people come in probably doesn't help us. Sorry.
And partly you've answered my question, but I also was going to ask about how we measure success, because one of the issues, as you know, across the health service in Scotland is the real health inequalities. But we also have a major issue with digital divide, don't we? So is there a danger we reinforce this health inequality because many elderly people or those staying in areas with poor Wi-Fi, for example, or don't have a great understanding of IT may in a sense be disadvantaged again, for they've already got a health inequality.
I also have a question, I think, in the same area from Emma Harper, so maybe take
Sure.
Emma and then ask the witnesses to respond to both.
Yeah. Sure, thanks, Convener. It is around health inequalities and what are we doing to support people. And I know it's not just rural versus urban, because I know my sister has been doing COPD assessment for patients for 10 years using telehealth models. She's a respiratory nurse consultant. So for 10 years now, Dumfries and Galloway has been doing Stranraer Dumfries visits. And Dave has already alluded to more VC being initiated in Highlands and Islands. So I don't think it's just a rural versus urban thing, but I am interested in how we support people who maybe don't have normal or routine access or poor Wi-Fi or people who don't engage digitally. How do we support them?
Challenger Shoot and then Jeff Huggins. And
I'll pull out the actual stat, but I think we're in the mid 98% for people under the age of 55 owning a smartphone. So there's different types of access issues here. Obviously age is one thing you've raised, but if you took that under 55 group, use and access of a smartphone is one of the most democratizing and access improving things that we can do. There's no other channel that you can use that will get to 98% of the population. Right? There'll always be the 2%, and to an extent you can't design a system for them. I would suggest that we have face-to-face, we have the full service as we know it that can handle that kind of complexity. But I would be suggesting that for a large portion of the population, it will improve our ability to reach if we use tools that people are happy to use, and in this case a smartphone pretty much transcends socioeconomic and various other kind of divides. So that would be my first argument. The second argument would be, back to the same message we'd be giving out, I tried to get my dad to use an iPad. He didn't want to use it. One day he realised he could watch the cricket on it. Next thing I know, he's online banking, he's booking flights online and all the rest of it. He found something he wanted to do, and he can watch cricket on any room in the house, no matter what my mum says. Right? And that was, but in all seriousness, now he is using that technology. So it's back to the same point. If it's useful, people will do it.
Good, Jeff Huggins.
So I think the outcomes that we should be measuring are the health and care outcomes. They're not. There shouldn't be separate digital outcomes. I think we need some understanding of the digital change, but we are looking to provide better health and care. One of the challenges that we quite often hear in respect of the disadvantage and deprivation, and also the age-related perspectives that people have on the use of technology, is that unless something can be used by everyone, then we should maybe think about doing it differently or design it in such a way. But I don't think that's the future. The current system has never operated in that way. There have always been different approaches that people have taken to how they manage and interact with the system. We just have to understand that we can't primarily or exclusively relate on any one particular approach or channel. We have to have that mix so that we meet people where they are. So I think that's the straightforward and sensible answer.
Thank you very much. Lynn Huckerby.
I agree with that. I don't think one size fits all at all. I think for me it comes back to the service design approach, and it absolutely is critical that we do engage with minority groups. In fact, within NHS 24 we have a design principle which is flipping that Pareto principle to design for the 20%, and then you impact the many. And we've just recently had an example of some engagement with the deafened and hard of hearing communities, where we've got very clear insights and understanding of how they want to access services, which will be designed into the way we deliver services going forward.
Very much. And finally, Scott.
Yeah, I think this was like a good opportunity to bring in Public Health Scotland, which comes into being in April, and obviously ISD will be moving into Public Health Scotland as part of that. But health inequalities is a huge focus, or will be a huge focus for the new body. I absolutely agree with the points Jeff made about it. I think it would be wrong just to think about the technology in isolation. There's many things that contribute to health inequalities. And I think having access to good evidence and good data to underpin kind of what's going on locally will be really, really important for that. And so I think that's a big feature for us when we move into Public Health Scotland.
And a final brief supplementary from Emma Harper.
Yeah, thanks. It's just, it reminds me of Asthma UK have videos in different languages of how best inhaler technique is achieved. And that's one of the things that my sister will sit with patients and basically show them the video, and then that is the best way for them to understand. So the multilingual approach needs to be part of the digital technology as we move forward as well. Yeah.
I guess one of the interesting things on this is quite often we get into conversations as to whether we should create such videos, but the best answer is there's really good stuff out there already on YouTube, and usually in that context we can find it within 30 seconds, whereas it would probably take us 3 years to actually get the money together, commission the videos and deliver the videos. So, and again, this is the different sort of ecosystem that we're in now.
Thank you. And just to add to what Jeff said, we also know from people that receiving content through multimedia is far by way greater than expecting people to read a whole set of data and content. So we, that's one of our aspirations in terms of multiple provision of content.
And if it's very tight, I can squeeze in.
Supplementary, but in terms of, I know in community pharmacy, they are frustrated often around digital prescribing, and I just thought about this with regards to asthma patients and monitoring use around that and potential technologies in future. Where are we linking up with community pharmacy to make sure that this is a key part of being able to actually get a prescription without using the GP as that gatekeeper for that?
I'll take Chalner. I'm keen not to open up a whole new line of inquiry, which is not
we're in discussions
my
expectation. We're in discussions with them around, as I said before, a capacity building exercise to understand what their role is in a digitally enabled long-term condition management kind of system. Would ultimately be using a single source of clinical truth, etc., etc. So we're on it. We just need to go and find some funds.
Very briefly,
just to say, again, I'm not familiar with, but the practitioner services part of NSS must be engaging with Community Pharmacy Scotland. So again, I can find out more about that and feed it back separately.
Thank you very much. I thank all the witnesses for a very engaging session, very good session, and in anticipation of the additional information that one or two witnesses have promised. Thank you very much. We will suspend briefly in order to allow a change of panels and resume in 2 or 3 minutes in public session with the Cabinet Secretary. Thank you very much. Colleagues, and welcome back to the meeting of the Health and Sport Committee. Agenda item 1 and evidence on primary care. We're now welcome to the committee Jean Freeman, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, who is accompanied by Aidan Gricewood, the Deputy Director for Primary Care, Noreen Ahmad, who is the Head of GP Contract and Implementation, and Philip McLean, Patient Engagement and Health Inequalities Team Leader. Welcome, Cabinet Secretary, and welcome to you all. Can I start simply by asking what steps the Scottish Government is taking in developing a new health and social care strategy, and what role prevention and primary care will play in the development of that strategy?
So, as you'll know, and good morning to you, Convener, and to members, as you'll know, our health and social care strategy is the subject of current implementation. But it does need refresh in terms of the developments across a number of areas, not least the delivery of healthcare, the introduction of new technologies, and, as you rightly say, the importance of preventative work. So we are working on the current delivery through the Ministerial Strategic Group, which I co-chair with my colleague, Councillor Stuart Curry, who's the COSLA Health and Social Care spokesperson. We have a number of key stakeholders on that, including the current interim chair of the new body, Public Health Scotland, and a number of other individuals from the RCN, Royal Colleges, Health and Social Care Partnerships, and so on. And that group is working through the outcome of the joint review that we undertook with COSLA on how far we had got in terms of health and social care integration and what were the next steps that needed to be taken. So they are very focused on the overall delivery of those next steps, taking into account as we go what we've learned from Audit Scotland, where we are in the implementation of practice, and where we are on the journey that we're on to transform primary care. All of that alongside a realigned directorate, I think it's fair to say, in Health Directorate, which is now focused on population health. And so that is looking at what more we can do to address health inequalities and how we refocus some of our work in that area alongside the preventative agenda, which already encompasses the work we've done on smoking, on alcohol, and of course Mr Fitzpatrick's work on drugs.
Thank you very much. I'm sure in following the proceedings of this committee you will be aware of the evidence we've had from many witnesses of the need for something more than simply a continuation of the status quo or a development of existing trends, but also significant change. The AHP Director Scotland Group, for example, said there was a need for a move from a traditionally medical model of primary care to a collaborative and co-produced model of primary care, and some real concern about whether that is going to be delivered, for example, under the terms of the new contract. I wonder, first of all, Cabinet Secretary, do you agree with that? Do you agree that we need to see a significant shift in the way in which we view and the way in which we deliver primary care?
So I think we are already seeing a significant shift in the way in which primary care has been traditionally delivered. There are a number of drivers for that. One of them is phase 1 of the GP contract, which introduces the multidisciplinary team to GP and primary care practices and reasserts the role of the GP as the expert medical generalist leading that team. We are now in a place in a relatively short period of time where 2/3 of our practices, for example, have access to pharmacological support, which is making a significant difference. AHPs are in many of our practices, and indeed the AHP Association is a member of that ministerial strategic group that I mentioned at the outset, and are contributing to the overall work that we're taking forward on integration, of which primary care and the degree to which we can transform primary care is a central component. In addition, there are significant changes in how the ambulance service and NHS 24 are trialling changes in how they deliver their service and the nature of the service that they deliver. Two examples, NHS 24's trialling of triaging of calls for GP services in Musselburgh, and now looking to test that out in a more rural setting in the Borders. The Scottish Ambulance Service introduction of paramedics who can see and treat people at home rather than take them to A&E, where that is the clinically correct thing to do. What we're looking at are a number of building blocks towards the transformation of primary care. Some of those key building blocks I've just touched on, but they are building blocks because the transformation of primary care to secure its place as a cornerstone in our health service is a journey that will take some time. So I'm certainly not saying that there is nothing more to do. We just continue with what we've already set in train. I think what we've set in train is the beginnings of a transformational approach. But as we put those building blocks in place, there will be other innovations and developments that we should take on board. One of those, of course, is the use of technologies, where we see, for example, a growing number of people making use of Attend Anywhere, known in the north of Scotland as Near Me, and not simply for primary care services. Forth Valley, for example, are using it extensively in terms of ophthalmology consultants work with optometrists in the local high streets. So there is expansion to be done in that area, as well as in others.
One of the other things we've heard from many witnesses is the importance for both transforming primary care and for integration of health and care of good leadership. So can I ask if you are satisfied that for these processes the right governance is there in place?
I think at this point we have the right governance structures. We've gone through, as I'm sure you and colleagues know, a bedding in process in terms of the governance structures around IJBs and health and social care partnerships, where I think now there is greater clarity across the key partners of local government and our health boards as their role in terms of their relationship with IJBs. That was part of that joint review work that was done. That is not to say that there is no room for improvement in governance structures. But at this point, I'm less keen to focus on structures as I am on what is actually being delivered for the patient. And in that, I think the potential role of our GP clusters approach, again, something that has come out of phase 1 of the new GP contract, is beginning to show the real opportunity for collective leadership from those GPs in their clusters and how they take collective decisions about, for example, what areas of MDT development they want to focus on. So I'll give an example in Forth Valley, where collectively they decided, looking at their respective patient cohorts in different practices, that their priority was the introduction of a physiotherapy service across their practices, rather than pharmacotherapy. So different ones are choosing different things. I think that is entirely as it should be, because they're making decisions that make most sense based on their data and experience in that locality.
And given that and what you said about the significant role of GP clusters in transformation, how do you ensure that there is a coherence between what GP clusters are working on in that way you've described and the priorities set by health and social care partnerships. Does the government issue guidance on that? Is that something that's negotiated at a partnership level, or how does that go forward?
There is some guidance on that, but I think you've touched on an area where, with the Royal College of General Practitioners and with the chief officers and the IJB chairs, there is further discussion to be had. In some areas, it works well, and in others, less so. So, in common with some of the other work that we're undertaking, where I think one of the previous occasions I was here, with Councillor Curry, in fact, I spoke about how every single one of the 31 IJBs do something well, and every single one has areas to improve on, and they're not all the same. And so we needed to get to equity of good practice in core areas across the piece. I think that is similar here in terms of how well individual IJBs relate to their GP clusters. To be fair to them, GP clusters are recent formations, and the clusters themselves need time to work out how they want to operate, what they want to focus on. But I think there is room for us to consider what more we might do to help the IJBs understand what the clusters are doing, and the clusters to understand how they can inform IJB's commissioning and planning role.
Clearly, you've touched on the role of clusters in relation to the multidisciplinary team, and I imagine that's one of the areas where you'll want to ensure, while the diversity should be there to reflect local circumstances, there should also be a general understanding of the importance of that multidisciplinary role.
Yes, absolutely. And I think increasingly that is understood. And as we see, for example, the 2/3 of GP practices that now have access to that pharmacotherapy service, as they in their clusters talk to other colleagues who may not yet have accessed that, then they are our best advocates for the difference that that makes to the service that is delivered to patients and to their role individually as GPs. And of course, the degree to which we can work very well with the Royal College of General Practitioners is a real assistance to us in how we encourage the development of shared practice and the development of good practice.
Thank you very much. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Kavira. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and to your colleagues. You've alluded to this already, Cabinet Secretary, around the move towards looking at the health of the nation type approach. And I think we agree we have an unwanted tag here in Scotland that we need to deal with. So, with this approach, so we talk about the preventative agenda. It seems to be a conversation we have had ad infinitum, and we would recognise that the preventative agenda would have a positive impact on the demands within primary care. So, what is the Scottish Government doing to recalibrate the way the health service is delivering its healthcare service in terms of towards that sort of preventative agenda?
So there are a number of things. I think your starting point about the unwanted tag, I'm assuming you mean the unwanted tag as the sick man of Europe.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that is increasingly unfair, actually, if you look at the statistics about how, because that came from the incidence of heart disease, cancer and stroke, and the numbers, the mortality rate from those. And whilst we're nowhere near where we want to be in that, I think we have seen significant improvements. So I think the tag is even more unwarranted, actually, is not just unwanted, but that doesn't deny, in my mind, the problems we have around health inequalities, which is significant, and the difference in life expectancy. We're all familiar with the Glasgow Underground map and what that means. So I think there are, in terms of preventative health, the first thing that's important to say is that this is not exclusively the role of the health service. We all know, I'm sure we're very familiar with the work of Sir Harry Burns in identifying what are the key factors that produce health inequalities. In which the health service has a part to play in tackling those, but so does income, job opportunities, housing, and so on. And so this needs to be an approach that is picked up by colleagues in other portfolios and in other areas of public service. But in terms of health, the preventative agenda is in part the work that we've done on smoking and alcohol, and the work that Mr Fitzpatrick is taking forward on illicit drug use, and the work that's beginning on the use of prescribed medication, addictions to prescribed medication, the work that clinical colleagues are taking forward in terms of the arguable overprescription of antibiotics and what that means for longer term health. But equally, it is also work that is primarily led by Ms Todd in terms of the school agenda, the preventative work in education with children and young people, and in health, our work with women both in advance of pregnancy and during pregnancy, including in perinatal health. So there are a number of areas where what we're looking to do is prevent some of the health conditions that we are currently tackling from arising in those generations as they come forward. The other aspect of that is, two aspects of that is, what do we do to improve the reach of our screening programmes? So there is a work underway just now looking at all our screening programmes and what more might we do to ensure that they are easily accessible by those groups of people we are currently not reaching. That includes looking at how we deliver them and through what means. So, for example, one of the discussions I've had that needs to have more work behind it is with the, you will probably know this, Mr Whittle, I've forgotten, but there is an association of football community development trusts. And so one of the discussions I've had with them is how we might use their work with the community to increase access and use of some of those screening programmes. It's an important area for us to be able to detect early and therefore to treat. One other example I'll give you is an example that Greater Glasgow and Clyde and Glasgow City Council recently undertook, which was completely, it wasn't directly health related, but in discussions they identified that there were sections of the city where by and large nobody was actually employed by the health service. And of course our health service in Scotland is the largest employer. And so with the council they targeted, again not looking for people to have the right qualifications and experiences, but they targeted a number of support role opportunities in those areas so that, if you like, the health service came closer to people, because you knew the woman down the road that worked for the health board, you knew the guy across the street that worked for the health board, that made it feel a more accessible thing, and again helps to change attitudes and views about how you access services. The final thing I'd say is the work that we are looking at with community pharmacies on the role that they can play in preventative work and in helping people look at whether or not, for example, they can access a smoking cessation service in the areas where we need that to happen.
Thank you, Councillor. Rather fulsome answer you gave to me there, which I appreciate. What I would say though is we've got to be careful we don't underestimate the scale of the challenge. I agree with you that it's not a title we want to hold, but obviously we have major issue with drugs. We have a rise in type 2 diabetes. We have problems with the mental health. So I think we don't want to underestimate the challenge. It's the SPFL Trust, by the way. I think that I had written down here the tackling this cross portfolio, which you've alluded to as well, and certainly the role of the education system within that. So I think around whose responsibility is it for the sort of primary prevention, if you like, and given that in your answer that it is a cross portfolio issue, how do you leverage the budget in such a way across portfolio to bring that drive towards prevention?
So, whose responsibility is it? I think because population health and health inequality sit in my portfolio, I think that it would be reasonable to say it is that the health portfolio is the key driver here. But that means that I need to work with my colleagues, as I should do, in housing, in local government, in education, in justice, and you know we're doing some work with Mr Youssef on health services and suicide prevention in prisons, on what we can do in those areas and how their portfolios can contribute. In terms of, if you like, levering the budget, it's then looking at where we can work jointly. So, for example, the baby box sits firmly in Ms Todd's portfolio, but it is the health budget that pays for the baby box. So that is a good example of joined up working where we recognise that our budget should be contributing to that piece of work, but it goes out through the area of children and families. And every time we come to, and we will at some point come to budget discussions, one of the things that Mr Mackay increasingly looks for is how portfolios are cooperating in order to deliver particular goals that are shared. And that cooperation is not just in policy, it's also in terms of how we're using our resources.
Just as an example, I was in Ayrshire College last week, and they're doing some great work around mental health and tackling mental health, but that's coming out of the education budget. You know, and I think this is where I think the lines get a bit blurred. Or for example, if you have you talked about health inequalities. If we have we deliver a sort of breakfast club, if you like, that's coming out of the education budget, and I think that there's a crossover there between health and education. So how will the Scottish Government tackle those sort of issues?
So if we go back to Ayrshire College, I think you were at the graduation. In terms of, and they do very good work in my area as in yours. So last week, I think it was last week, I announced the funding and the agreed distribution for the 80 mental health counsellors that will go into further and higher education. So Ayrshire College will benefit from that. That may then allow them to use some of the resource that they're currently putting into mental health to redeploy it elsewhere, because we're actively contributing to that. The same in schools. We've reached an agreement with COSLA on how the funding will be distributed for the mental health counselling support in schools. And what I've said is some schools have already taken significant and important initiatives in this area. Some have taken one of their teaching posts, and with additional training, up until now, that teacher has been the counsellor. And what I've said is that I don't want that disrupted, because if that is working and that individual is trusted in that school, I don't want that area disrupted, but it is perfectly possible to use the additional resource from my portfolio that is labelled mental health counsellor to backfill on the teaching side, if that is what makes sense for that school. So I think that we see a number of areas where different parts of government are contributing to what is that collective aim around what more can we do to prevent ill health and help people be more aware of how to live more healthily. One of the areas I know the committee is interested in is social prescribing, for example. So if I think of an example, in East Kilbride, one of the local primary care practices there initiated a bit of work. It ticks a number of boxes. It's around high blood pressure. They use technology, the app on an individual's phone, to monitor blood pressure where there is a debate around whether or not you've got a high blood pressure that is an indicator of ill health or other issues. You simply using the app on your phone that they give you, monitor your blood pressure every day directly into the practice. The practice monitors why it thinks that might be. It's also obviously looking at your lifestyle, your weight, whether you smoke or not. And one of the things it does is issue a prescription to the local authorities' leisure and recreation facilities, where there the team is ready to receive that prescription, produce a specific plan for you, and what they are finding is that even when the engagement with the practice is over, in other words, what you don't have a particular health condition or you've managed it because you've lost weight or become more active, individuals continue to go along to the gym or take part in the walking club or whatever it was that they were doing. So we're seeing examples where bringing together those different public services is producing for the patient a much better outcome than if it was exclusive in one area or another.
Okay, David Torrance.
Cabinet Secretary, does the Scottish Government's definition of primary care fully reflect the range of staff and activities involved in primary care and supports a person-centred, patient-led approach?
Yes, I think it does. I think it does. I think our definition, if you like, of primary care, where we want to see the balance between preventative work and treating ill health. We want to help people better manage their own long-term conditions, be more informed about what is possible and engaged in decision-making. And that involves access to a range of different sets of professional skills, does meet the need of individuals. The interesting area is, in fact, part of the work that you as a committee did in terms of your own survey and so on. And I found that very interesting and very helpful, if I may say so, to inform some of the work that we're looking at about how we engage the public more widely in some of the areas of development that we want to pursue. So one of the things we know, for example, is that by and large the public is ahead of us as health and health professionals, in the use of technology and the use of apps. They expect us to be using it more. They expect to be able to access things more through apps on their phone or through the internet. So we need to catch up with them, because that's where they are expecting us to go and would quite like us to have got there already. So we need to do more of that. Attend Anywhere is one example, that blood pressure monitoring using the app on your phone is another. But the real challenge for us is not those opportunities, but it's how we get the spread. And how do we ensure that where there is good practice and those developments, innovative developments, it is picked up and spread across primary care. And of course, primary care has a range of contractual arrangements that sit underneath it that we have to be able to work with in order to ensure we get what we need.
David Torrance.
What can be done to empower allied health professions and ensure that they are involved in organising and making decisions about local services and how they are designed?
So two things, I think, well, three probably. One is actually their involvement now in the Ministerial Strategic Group on Integration of Health and Social Care, which will help inform, because it's a group that is very focused on practical improvements and work to deliver on the recommendations from the review. And to help us with that, we have seconded in a former chief officer of a large IJB to help us work with other IJBs, so almost peer-to-peer work to improve practice and work. So their involvement in that, the recognition of their role that came through strongly in the work that you and we did on the Safe Staffing Bill, and where that sits in health boards and the important role that they have across both health and social care. And work that we need to do, which helps to encourage the GP clusters and the IJBs to be informed in their planning and commissioning of services about the range of services that allied health professionals, but also community pharmacy, can offer in the services that they commission from primary care. It's also in part some of the conversations I've had with our health boards, both chief execs and chairs, about how they, as a board, are designing and delivering primary care services to be commissioned from IJBs.
And Cabinet Secretary, do you recognise that for AHPs, certainly some of the evidence we heard was that the definition of primary care still seems to them to be very focused on the role of the GP at the centre rather than the multidisciplinary team as a whole?
Yes, I understand their concern. I hope they're reassured by my assurance that I do not dismiss. I think they are pretty key if we are going to see the GP become or move into the role that they are best fitted for, which is that expert medical generalist, that all the training, all the investment, that is what they should be doing, then the AHPs are key to ensuring that that can happen. I think increasingly GPs and the BMA understand that too. But I understand why they would take that view, and my job is to reassure them by actions that the view is not as narrow as their perception of it might be.
Thank you very much. David Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary
Morning.
and members of the panel. Can I move to workforce planning, an area I've raised many times over this inquiry? Can I start with allied health professionals? Cabinet Secretary will be well aware of the Audit Scotland report, which said that almost a third of posts for allied health professionals were unfilled for 3 months or more. And as you know, Cabinet Secretary, the Scottish Government doesn't control the training of these occupations, but I think the approach from Scottish Government is to have a more managed approach to training. Cabinet Secretary, could you outline what you mean by that and explain how that's going to be changed in the future? Because clearly AHPs are crucial for the future development of primary care.
Yes, what I mean by a more managed approach.
Yes.
So what I mean by that, so it's no secret, it's known to all of us that there are important data gaps in what Scottish Government knows about where our workforce is and the numbers of our workforce. And one of the keys to a more managed approach is to have better data. So what I mean by a more managed approach is A, to begin to fill in the data gaps, to understand better from primary care what is needed in their areas, and to know better the profile of our existing workforce, so that we can be more robust in knowing how many we need to put through in training in order to produce the numbers that we need, both to replace those who may be retiring, but also to increase the size of the workforce in any particular area. Now, we've discussed this before. I think we all agree that workforce planning is not an exact science by any means, but I think that there is more that we can do, and there is more we are working on doing in order to ensure that our planning is more focused around the data that we do have and filling in the data gaps that we need to fill in.
And that seems sensible. Clearly this will take time. Could I ask some specific questions around that? Obviously the government has specific controls over GP training, and I'll touch on that in a second. Do you see then the role of government to be taking a greater role in training in the future? So for example, you would set targets for each of the AHPs in the longer term, so that you can then have better workforce management in 4 or 5 years' time when the new graduates are ready to work in primary care.
So that is one option. What we've got to remember, though, is that there are a number of players, just as there are in GP training, for example, or medical undergraduate numbers. There are a number of players in that field. So there is government's view about what is needed that is informed in part by our medical schools, by our Royal Colleges, and by the data that we do have. There's then the practicalities of how you put people through and the length of time that that takes, and what you can do to lever a retention to the health service in Scotland of the numbers that you are investing in training. And we've seen an example of that, of what might be possible with the ScotGem course and the bursary that links to a commitment to work for the health service on qualification. There's work going on, and of course there is NES, our Education Health Board, that has a central role in curriculum and training and numbers and helping us to plan some of that activity. And then in terms of doctors, there's the deaneries and so on. So yes, that is a way to go, but we need to take all of those players with us, and we need to maximise what they offer us by way of their particular expertise. So I don't think we'd want to get into a place, with the greatest of respect, where I decide that we need X or Y without a decent amount of evidence behind it and the knowledge that those who will deliver it are ready to deliver it. And in the AHP situation, that also includes training places. And we've done a bit of work recently to try and ensure that that is increased. And we can therefore offer more places for the training itself, because we know the training places will be there too.
Yeah, and of course I wasn't suggesting anyway that the Scottish Government deletes the great influence of the professional associations in each of these. I was really making the point that when I've spoken to these organisations, they say, yes, but what we need is more funded places from universities to allow the development of workforce planning. And obviously that's not your responsibility, but across government it is. So that's obviously a factor that's going to require a lot of work with your colleagues. So it will mean more places, more funded places, because I'm sure universities will wish to expand, but they need agreement on this.
Well, in GP, in medical undergraduate, we have increased the number of places. We've taken some steps to ensure a greater proportion of those are Scottish domiciled students. I think we're now in the 8th year of our increase in the number of nursing and midwifery student places, all of which carry a bursary from next year of £10,000 that is non-means tested. We continue to increase the number of training places available in dentistry and in AHP work as well, particularly in physios. So we do have a critical role to play, but we need to marry what we're doing in terms of increased numbers of places with improving the data on which we base what we need. I think by and large, so far, we are doing that reasonably well, but undoubtedly there are data gaps that we need to fill.
You've predicted the question I was going to ask was obviously around GPs, and whilst clearly there was general welcome about the additional 800 GP places that government were predicting, you know, Audit Scotland had some question marks around that. Was where did you get the figure of 800, and some question marks around, yes, but what actual modelling was done on that figure?
Right. So what we did, where did we get the figure of 800? We used trend data for over the previous 5 years on the age and sex profile of GP workforce, the number of newly qualified GPs, the rates of qualified GPs joining our NHS in Scotland and moving from Scotland, compared to those moving from Scotland to elsewhere, with the numbers leaving through retirement and the data estimates of the number of GPs in the workforce, remaining broadly stable up to 2027, at the point where we hit that 800 number. What that actually produced in terms of how all that worked itself out, and we can actually give you the detail of that if that would be helpful, is that it was round about an additional 700 GPs were required. But we took the decision as a government to increase that to 800 to allow for the unexpected, I think would probably be fair, and the degree to which our calculation based on all those factors I've just outlined, may be plus or minus a percentage. And that was how we got to 800. I think more or less in line with what the Royal College of General Practitioners view is, although I think theirs is 830.
How would you react to Audit Scotland's criticism, effectively, that there wasn't, doesn't appear to have accurate modelling done for this? Does it relate to the earlier point that if you do not have obvious data, surely then it's nightmarishly difficult to do modelling if you don't have data?
It is difficult, not nightmarishly difficult, but it's difficult to do modelling, which is why I keep coming back to the point that there are data gaps that we need to fill in order to continue to refine and improve the modelling that we do. Modelling is done. It is then done and tested with our colleagues and partners in terms of whatever other work they may have done. For example, the Royal College of General Practitioners in this particular instance. And estimates are then produced. But undoubtedly, improving the data will improve the modelling, will improve the outcome. And that's why I keep returning to filling those data gaps.
If I could, can we just ask another question on this? It's obviously important in any modelling to look at what the real world says. So, for example, certainly in my own experience, talking to individual GPs and the Royal College around Scotland, particularly Hans and Islands, there's a couple of big factors that the Cabinet set to be well aware of. First point is with the reserved issues around pension restrictions, there's been major issues about GPs and indeed consultants wishing to be full-time, particularly post-55. So that's a real-world experience. So if you say, for example, I know how many graduates I'm going to have as a Cabinet Secretary in day one, so that means in 40 years' time, I'll have so many full-time equivalents. The reality is you won't, because post-55 it's very hard to see full-time GPs because of the pension issue and work pressures and others. The other change, certainly I've picked up just in my own experience, is that many GPs don't wish to become the traditional partner in GP's practice. They're quite happy to be salaried or another role within the practice. So that affects your workforce management, because you're not going to have these full-time people post-55, and you can't change the pension situation because it's a reserved issue.
Yes, and you're right, and that's partly why I say it will never be an exact science. However, just on the two areas you mentioned, I'll come back to pensions. Just on if we set the pensions issue aside for the minute, what we know from the Royal College of Physicians in Glasgow and in Edinburgh is work that they have done on the post-55 medical group, who regardless of pensions, as they approach that time in their career, want to make changes in their career. They don't necessarily want to leave medicine, but they may want to undertake less onerous rota work, for example, or fewer hours and so on. So we have data from them, albeit in smaller samples, but nonetheless important indicators of trends over time about what increasing proportion of that post-55 age group look to move out of full-time work in totally or in part. That can be factored into our overall planning. We've also got at the other end data from them about the numbers of medical graduates who want to take time out before they think about their foundation year training and where they go, and often they go abroad and gather some experience, and the percentage of those who come back to us. So all of that we can factor in, but all of it. So there is data, if you like, elsewhere that in collaboration with colleagues we can use to help make it slightly more robust in terms of factors that you otherwise might not take account of. And just in the passing, in terms of the Royal College of Surgeons, they have a very specific programme for surgeons, consultant surgeons, reaching that age who do not want to leave the practice of medicine, but do not want to be part of the rotas that they have been part of, that with our support is looking at those surgeons being able to work outside of, for example, the urban setting in more rural settings and undertaking some training work. So there are opportunities in there to use. Finally, on the pensions question, you're absolutely right. Now, that was one that could not be predicted. It happened. It was a decision that was taken. I think that the UK government increasingly understands there are consequences to that decision that are affecting the health service, not only in Scotland but south of the border in a range of different ways. And there is work that we have underway at this time that I hope to be able to finalise and agree very shortly that will allow some alleviation of that pension position for those affected in this financial year, whilst we wait to see what further flexibilities UK government might introduce to the matter going forward from the next financial year.
I think you offered to Mr Stewart that you would share with the committee the calculations and the basis of that. Can I ask just very briefly, in making those calculations, how far you took into account the changing role of the GP under the new contract, and whether those calculations suggested to you objectives or targets that ought to be set for some of the other members of the multidisciplinary team?
So, of course, those calculations were made prior to the negotiation and agreement of the GP contract. So there will be a point where we will, as we see it roll out and what it actually means, where we will revisit those calculations and see if there is any significant impact on them by the rollout of certainly phase 1 of the GP contract. Phase 2 is coming, and whether or not there is any significant impact on those calculations, and whether or not we would want to make any changes at that point. But at this stage, that's not work we've done yet, because the GP contract is still being implemented in phase 1. Sorry, my colleague wants to...
No, just a supplementary point. Just a few things that will help going forward on the modelling as well. So we've got the workforce tool going out to practices in terms of which will give us a really accurate picture of not just the number of GPs but the numbers of sessions worked, including by other workers within the GP practice. So that's an important bit of evidence. We'll also have we're also undertaking a workforce survey work, so about well-being and job experience of these individuals as well. And then we've also got the data tool going out in terms of incomes of GP practices as well. So I think all of those, as we go forward and you start to do year on year, we'll get those sorts of trends that will allow us to make those sorts of to interrogate the sorts of issues that we're talking about here in terms of whether they're having positive effects or negative effects, and over time build up a better picture. But it takes time to build up those trends and be able to really come up with definitive things that you can relate to specific events or the nature of work that we're talking about.
Thank you very much. Emma Harper.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and panel. I'm interested in the role of the third sector and community link workers. We've heard evidence about the important role of community link workers, especially in signposting people and even accompanying people to services, as well as their engagement with third sector partners. So I'm interested in how expectations seem to be increasing for the third sector in delivering many services and such as I guess we've got different services. How do we support and sustain third sector, especially if any conflicts arises with competing budgets and who's asking for different pots of money? So I'm interested in how the government will ensure that the sector is adequately funded and involves in the planning and design and the benchmarking of services. And are the Scottish Government ensuring that there's barriers that can be freed or enabled, that we can support collaborative working with the third sector as well?
So first of all, on your first point about the community link workers, yes, they are proving very successful. I recently had an email from a GP practice in the East End extolling the virtues of their community link worker and thanking us for continuing the funding for that, which of course we will do, and we are nearing the completion of the rollout of those 250 community link workers by the end of this Parliament. On the third sector organisations are represented on that ministerial strategic group on integration. And although I keep talking about that, of course, primary care is right up the middle of integration, as well as what we do in adult social care, of course. So they are part of that. We have IJBs across the country that actively engage with their third sector organisations in their planning and then to a degree in their commissioning. But again, that is not the case in every IJB. So we need to work with third sector organisations about what more is needed to encourage that engagement with the third sector across all our IJBs. But our IJBs have a responsibility to plan and commission services that best meet the needs of their local population. And so that does not automatically mean that the third sector will always be the provider. They have to meet the same kind of criteria and standards in terms of quality of service, accessibility of service, and value of money of service as any other provider might do. Many of our third sector organisations, I know, are working actively to ensure that they do that. For example, the recent coming together of Enable and Send Scotland to ensure that they could make a better offer in the area of very specialist and necessary provision that they make in terms of particular high intervention 24/7 care packages. So the third sector organisations are themselves considering what more they might do in order to increase their engagement, but also the level of attractiveness of their offer into the IJBs.
And with the community link workers, I know there's obviously, they do different jobs in different areas and different boards because they're specifically focusing on their own community in their locality, and especially because there's a wide range of services that might be needed in rural areas like my South Scotland region versus urban areas as well. So I'm interested in how would the Scottish Government, or how will the Scottish Government evaluate and monitor how community link workers are working, what the impact will be, and then how do we look at future-proofing community link workers?
Yeah, thank you for that. I should have said in answer to your last question, of course, that we approved 3-year funding for third sector organisations. Now, when that is a significant advance, done by, I think, by my colleague Miss Constance when she was a Cabinet Secretary, in order to provide a degree of stability to their planning. In terms of monitoring the impact of community link workers, we've commissioned NHS Health Scotland to undertake qualitative work on an evaluation of community link worker early adopter sites. So those were the first ones in, to understand the impact that they have, and then look at how we might develop that role, albeit that the role itself should be meeting what is identified as local needs. So the GP, for example, who wrote to me, their particular community link worker was undertaking primarily work on financial advice and access to benefit services and so on. Of course, some of the additional work in our new Social Security Agency with those local social security staff may free up some community link workers to do less of that and concentrate on other areas.
Can I just add also that there has been a comprehensive evaluation of the links workers pilots that was done in 2016-17, and Glasgow University did that, so there's a lot of learning in that report.
Just a final wee sup. Is NHS Health Scotland responsible for like a national training programme for community link workers? Because they're so different in what many of them do we have a national programme, then there's local?
No, so community links workers are chosen on the basis of their experience and their skill set to be able to work with patients who have wide-ranging, difficult circumstances, and so they're employed on that basis. So there's not a formal national training programme, but they are provided bespoke training programmes depending on the local population needs and what's required there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Following on from the colleagues' questions there around this sort of expectation of a continued increase in on the third sector to deliver pressure on the third sector to deliver services, and I think we all recognise their ability to shoulder, especially some of the very specialised issues. I was looking at we are aware, just to use a couple of our local examples. Obviously, you've got Ayrshire Cancer Support and Break the Silence, who have very specialist mental health services that the NHS itself are signposting patients to, but both report that they have increasing waiting lists. So that, against a backdrop of the raised awareness of mental health issues and the increase in budget towards mental health, is there a need perhaps to look at the way in which they are financed within that framework to allow them to shoulder the load that they can? Because what they're currently reporting now is they have capacity issues.
So what I would expect in that particular instance, or anything that is comparable to that, so in Ayrshire, as you know, North Ayrshire, IJB is the lead IJB for the whole of Ayrshire in terms of mental health provision and support. So I would be expecting that IJB to be taking those kind of concerns and issues, so actively seeking those from all the various organisations across the three Ayrshires that are delivering mental health services, who are third sector organisations, about the nature of the services that they deliver, where they are in terms of demand versus their capacity, and then in the IJB's commissioning and planning to factor in whether or not it can make better use of those services and provide the financial support in order to see those delivered. But those are areas where IJBs need to take the lead in terms of the significant resource that we are committing to integration in order to decide in a particular area who should be the provider of mental health services at different stages that we need for our local community. And that will be a mix of what is done directly through the health board in terms of CALM services and other provision, adult psychiatric services and so on, and what third sector provision can be made.
And I appreciate that, Cabinet Secretary, that there's a desire and a pathway from the government, I'm quite sure, to an IG, but I think the reality of what's happening on the ground, perhaps that money is not getting past an IGB, because there's pressures across all of the services then. I think given that the IGB are holding that those purse strings, how do we ensure that those services that are being signposted to by the NHS are getting their fair share of the funding to allow them to deliver those services?
So that is it's a really important point, and I'm sure there'll be variations of that elsewhere in the country. There'll be examples where it works really well, and variations maybe on mental health, maybe on something else. So what I would hope to be able to do then is to understand what those are from yourself and others, and factor that in to the work that David Williams is doing on our behalf with all the individual IJBs to deliver on that joint review's recommendations within those really clear timescales. So all the IJBs know that mental health provision is an area that they should give priority to. That's agreed between ourselves and COSLA as the partners in this exercise. Now, how they go about doing that is an area where we can perhaps assist them to learn from each other, again, where there is good practice and where there are areas of difficulty. So I'm very happy in knowing about where there are examples, as you've outlined in those areas, to undertake to make sure that David can pick that up in the work that I know he's doing with the Ayrshire IJBs.
Thank you.
Before I bring in Miles Briggs as Cabinet Secretary, are you in a position to tell us when the rollout of the 250 community link worker posts will be completed, and will you be able to let us know where those posts will be in due course?
So the rollout will be completed in the time frame which was this parliamentary term, so 2021, and we will make sure that we identify in that. We will have information already about where they are located. We'll make sure that we bring that together to date, if you wish, and then there'll be more to come, and make sure that you receive that.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Miles Prince.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the panel. I wanted to touch upon some of the questions we've had already with regards to the Audit Scotland report, because one of the key challenges they outlined was to date the Scottish Government have introduced major policy changes without reliable basis for the plans. I think one of the things I'm concerned around is sometimes the destabilisation we see. So when you look at community pharmacy, for example, pharmacists moving into an acute and GP setting has created a situation where community pharmacies are now finding it difficult to recruit. And also when you look towards that, and pharmacists I've visited here, the additional costs around locums. So I just wanted to, I know the Cabinet Secretary's outlined some of her thinking around future-proofing that workforce, but where is actually real-world data now being collected to see where there's destabilisation?
So just give me 2 seconds here till I find my relevant bit of paper. So it is an area that we understand is happening. We also see it, for example, in advanced nurse practitioners, where we are putting in place significant training, and there is a growing enthusiasm from nursing colleagues to take up those opportunities. And what we see is, in fact, I was talking to one of our Health Board Chief Executives yesterday who said, I keep training them and then I keep losing them because they're moving into GP practices and into out-of-hours work. And I think that it is almost an inevitable period that we will go through where we see, as we produce more, that we see a skewing of where people go to work before that evens out. And I'm not sure that there is a great deal that we could have done to avoid that. What we need to do, though, in those instances is talk with community pharmacy, for example, about what more we can do that would assist them. So we've increased the level of the numbers in training and so on, and increased the numbers of pharmacy technicians, and in some instances it is actually the pharmacy technician that is appropriate for the GP cluster, as opposed to one pharmacist for a number of clusters and technicians undertaking some of the work. So I think you're right. As we go through this transformation journey, you will see it tilt back and forward before it reaches a relatively even keel. What I talked to that Health Board Chief Executive about was, well, what do you need to do to train more then? So in areas where we can assist, what more can we do to try and smooth that path a bit more? One of the examples is one of our health boards that has made significant use of theatre academies, nurse academies, to upskill their existing staff. So they're a way to look at what more they might do in that area.
It's just something I think we need to monitor, as these sort of sometimes unintentional consequences do obviously occur. I wanted to move on to GP contract, and specifically a few points with regards to phase 2. So what do you, Cabinet Secretary, hope to achieve, I suppose, through phase 2 as that's brought forward? When do you anticipate negotiations and a poll of professionals of the phase 2 of the contract will take place? And specifically, you've outlined in the past, and I know concerns have been expressed at this committee regularly, concerns with rural GPs. And I think you had pointed towards almost a second level of that contract, or another specifically rural GP contract. Is that your plans as well?
So in terms of phase 2, that is a part of the contract, of course, that will have to be negotiated. One of the things that we are looking to achieve, at phase 2, as I think the BMA are, is to consolidate stability of funding around GP practices. So that means that, for example, the data collection that my colleague mentioned earlier is critical to help us have some of the evidence base to enter those negotiations and to conclude those. In terms of the rural GP practice, of course, we've benefited significantly from the expertise and leadership of Sir Lewis Ritchie. One of the things that we have been able to do is to, if you like, consolidate the group that he leads of rural practitioners which was initially a short life group, and to say that it is no longer short life. It is a group that has to have an input into that contract, so that when we negotiate phase 2, we are fully aware of the issues that they want us to be able to address. They're not in the negotiations, but they should certainly be informing what we are doing. And we have undertaken to ensure that there is greater clarity around the flexibilities that do exist in the current contract. And I hope to be able to say a bit more on that shortly. And of course, Sir Lewis's report with a number of recommendations from that group, partly about phase 1 of the contract, what more we can do within that, partly about, if you like, beginning to set out what they think are the key issues for phase 2, should be with us at the end of this month. There was a third part to your question, Mr. Briggs.
It was specifically around having that separate contract. So I think last time rural GPs would say they were asked for their views, but then they weren't necessarily part of the contract. So it was, given the difference in often how the contracts influenced rural GPs' work, and specifically some of the problems they've highlighted from not being able to register patients from outside area, to actually carry on some of the work which we're trying to move away, like vaccinations. Just the point of whether or not it could be that we'd have 2 contracts and one would be for rural specific.
So the key thing, there's 2 key things to remember. First of all, in terms of what I said about flexibilities in the existing contract, we have made really clear that there is flexibility for existing GP practices to continue vaccinations, and we do not have to centralise that. And there's a number of areas where that's been resolved and sorted, and we will do more in that area. The other thing to remember is, of course, this is a process of negotiation with the BMA, and I do not anticipate that they would be minded to have 2 contracts, and I can understand why. But equally, the BMA have a responsibility to listen to their rural members and to ensure that in what they bring to the negotiating table, in terms of what they are looking for in that contract, that they have taken due consideration, excuse me, of what their rural members said to them about phase 1 and are saying to them about phase 2. Rural GPs have my absolute assurance that we will take proper account of what the group that is working with Sir Lewis Ritchie, which I think is generally recognised to be pretty representative across the rural GP community, we will take absolutely due cognizance of what they are saying and look to do 2 things. Factor that into our negotiating position, where we believe that is possible, where we believe that is not possible, to ensure that we explain that to them, rather than people just wait till it's a done deal and then feel that they've been ignored.
Yeah. And on that point, in terms of who we're actually trying to deliver services for patients, in his evidence, Dr. David Hogg had specifically said that our patients are among the best judges of how services are run. And for negotiation reasons, specifically, patients were not involved in the design of the contract. So I just wondered, in terms of phase 2, where you thought there was improvement around that as well.
It's a very interesting point. We are hopeful that we would negotiate and conclude phase 2 by 2021. Although there are a number of factors that will play into that, not least the data collection and others. I'm not sure that we have given particular consideration to that point about the patient's view, but I'm happy to commit today that we will give consideration to how that might be taken forward and advise the committee when we've reached a view.
Very briefly, yeah.
Just wanted to look towards, I know in recent weeks we've seen issues with destabilisation of GP practices, for example, the Bridge of Erne surgery, which I know my colleague Liz Smith has been meeting with you on. How do you monitor, and in terms of where we stand today with primary care, unstable practices, so that we get ahead of that curve to try to prevent what we've seen, and we've seen it here in my own region in Lothian, where practices often don't flag up that they've got real workforce challenges, and then you see this handing back of the keys situation. I just wondered if you had any statistics of practices you today find are unstable in workforce.
So it is a role for health boards to understand where all their GP practices are and to identify where they think there might be areas of risk. And certainly we encourage them to do exactly as you said, to try and get ahead of the curve. That is not always easy for them to do because, of course, GP practices are independent contractors. And so they have a degree of operation as any small business would, where they are not necessarily compelled to give you all the information that you might require as a public service to plan. And so sometimes the destabilisation happens very, very quickly, and there was no notice given to the board, and the board could not have foreseen it. And in those circumstances, the board needs to have processes in place to quickly respond to that. So there is arguably a degree to which it could be a bit better, but there are those significant constraints around it that would allow boards to be fully confident that they were able to understand the situation in all their GP practices and identify those where they anticipated there might be difficulties.
Can I also add that we do have a sustainability group that is looking at exactly doing that to get ahead of the curve, to bring the representatives together from across Scotland to look at anticipate any issues that are arising. Mostly these are managed quite well at a health board and partnership level, but the ones that we hear of, we want to be anticipating that and coming together and considering all the tools at their disposal to prevent this happening.
I should, sorry, Convener, I should just say that some of the things that we put in place in terms of phase 1 of the GP contract, in terms of financial support for premises and for rent and for refurbishment of premises and so on, is specifically designed to address some of the key risk areas around the sustainability of GP practices. And that has been very well received and I believe has had a significant impact on some.
And I don't want to, just a point to write back, maybe, is a chance in terms of the GP, it's gone off my, no, we'll write to you on that point.
George Adam.
Okay, thank you, Convener and Cabinet Secretary, good morning. I was just wanted to go on the point of Audit Scotland told us the audit trail for GP surgeries kind of stopped at the GP's door. You know, and they said it was quite difficult for government or anyone else to be able to kind of get their strategy and move things forward. As we progress down these negotiations, will we be in a place where we'll be able to follow that public pound?
So, Audit Scotland are quite right, and the reason for that, I think I've already touched on. We are dealing with independent contractors and have been since the creation of our National Health Service, so it's not a new phenomenon. And therefore, whilst they contract from the health service to deliver a service, they operate as a business and there are limitations then on what can be required of GPs in terms of the provision of data. That is why part of phase 1 of the contract included an agreement that we would do what we've already touched on we will do, which is that survey which will be issued very shortly, to try and understand questions around GP practice income, issues around premises and other matters that my colleagues can add to if they wish. There'll be about a 3-month period for GPs to provide those returns to us, and that will give us a step forward in what Audit Scotland are asking for. What Audit Scotland are asking for is entirely legitimate. You should be able to audit the public pound. You should see where it goes. But there are restrictions around that are not of our making. They are part of the system and have been part of the system for a very long time. So we are looking to see how far we can go in trying to audit that public pound.
On the same system, I take on board that independent contractors right from day one with the NHS was a key reason why we were able to deliver an NHS service right from the start. But the big debate we seem to be having at the moment is there are salaried board GPs now. Now the BMA will say they cost a fortune. but there's no actual guarantee that compared to a GP. They've not given us the figures to actually confirm that. Now, how do you see us going forward with all the challenges that we've outlined here today with GP? I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel. I'm not asking you to rebuild the system from scratch. We are where we are. But when we've got the independent contractor model, which even to this day surprises members of the public because they think their GP's a member of the NHS, not an independent contractor, or the salaried board model, or is it a mix and match? What is the way forward, or how do you see it as a way forward for delivering?
So I think the way forward will be a mixed economy of independent contractors and salaried GPs, and partly that will be driven by younger GPs emerging who want to be a GP, but they do not want to run a business. People tend to think that salaried GPs appear when just when a practice falls over. And the health board has to step in. That is to a degree the case. But increasingly, the drive for that is coming from newly qualified GPs, younger GPs, both men and women, who want a different role. So they want to be a GP, but they do not want to run a business. They want to be a GP and they want to see what else as a GP they might do. They may take on a clinical fellowship. They may take on a training role, for example, with medical graduates coming through GP training. They may take on a role with the local academic institution or any variation thereon right throughout their career. And they want to be able to do that. And I want to encourage them to do that and to be able to do that. Because I think, in part, that begins to reinforce the status of the GP inside the medical profession itself, which is really important. So I think we will see an emerged mixed model of independent contractors and salaried GPs. And at the end of the day, the provision of service to the patient and the maximising of opportunity, of innovation and of new ways of delivering is the really critical thing that we want to see.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. You mentioned that under phase 1 of the contract, GPs have 3 months to complete and return a survey on these matters relating to the public pound. What happens if they fail to meet that requirement?
Well, it's part of the contract, so the BMA and ourselves will need to, well, what we would do in the first instance is we'd go to those GP practices that haven't and asked what the problem is, see if we can help them with that. There may be questions where they're not sure where their answers are for it, see if we can assist. We certainly wouldn't want to jump straight into waiving contracts at people. So we'll try and see how we can help. The BMA will be actively engaged in this too, because it's part of the contract that they negotiated and they are fully supportive of it. So we will try and see if we can assist those GP practices that may have half completed it, not completely completed it, and so on. And then if we are left with 1 or 2 who are not doing it, then we would discuss with the BMA what we might do in those instances.
And in entering into phase 2 of the contract negotiations, will you have greater ambitions yet to enable yourselves and ourselves to track the public pound in relation to general practice?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Whether or not that ambition is realisable in the context of independent contractors will in part, we'll know that in part by how well GP practices respond to that survey and what use is made of the data that comes through. But I think that we are working, and I think phase 1 of the contract assisted with this. Fully implementing it and keeping on going is important. But I think it assisted in a wider recognition that notwithstanding independent contractor status, everyone is working for our National Health Service and for the patients that we are there to serve. And so the better we can cooperate together, both in the planning, the commissioning, the design and the delivery of services and all the infrastructure that sits underneath that to do it, then the better service we'll deliver, but also it will be increasingly a more fulfilling role.
Thank you very much. Brian Whittle.
Convener, can I go into a report that Professor Sahari Burns made on targets, looking at developing a set of indicators that allows us to understand the contribution of multidisciplinary primary care towards improving outcome for Scotland people. So where are we in developing that set of standards, that set of indicators?
To understand the contribution of the multidisciplinary team.
Yeah, so.
Who can get back to you? I don't think we know where Harry Burns' reviews.
Is that in the engagement part?
So we've published a primary care monitoring and evaluation strategy, which sets out a framework for the evaluation of primary care reform over the next 10 years. And as part of that, there's going to be work undertaken to identify what the effect of the expansion of multidisciplinary teams is on primary care and the wider system.
Can I just, so an interesting one for me was Dr. Was it William Bird on the 29th of October when he was discussing social prescribing here. One of the things that he was wary of is that an effective indicator of success should ensure that measuring and interventions do not widen the inequality gap, and that idea that the lowest 20% of that index of multi-deprivation, how do we, is there indicators in there to ensure that they are involved in that prevention element? How do we ensure that? How do we measure that?
So, before we leap to how we measure it, I think if you take something like social prescribing, what we need to look at is how do we roll out the understanding of its value more effectively, and whether or not we target that rollout in areas of multiple deprivation, as we do in terms of the community link workers, so that before we measure, we make sure that we're focusing in the right place, and then we measure impact, if you follow me. And so part of the work that is being undertaken in that realignment to population health is how we tackle health inequalities. Within that, it is focusing on those areas where inequalities are at their starkest. So I think it would be fair to say that probably over the last 20 odd years, in terms of health and healthier diet and exercise and so on, we have initially, in the initial period, tended to send out our work and our messages on a population-wide basis. I still have stuck in my head that initial advert of the best-looking builder I've ever seen with a banana at his ear, supposedly phoning somebody. So what we've seen as a consequence is that, generally speaking, the population has got healthier, but the gap remains. And I am very clear in my view that I, for example, do not need targeted messages about eating more healthily, exercise and diet, smoking, alcohol and so on. I am very fortunate, have huge advantages, and if I'm not doing what I need to do, then that is entirely my informed choice. But there are a number, because I have access to all of that. So what we need to do in our health inequalities work is target that work so that those changes are accessible to people. That includes social prescribing, I think, and are more accessible to people. So we need to refocus the work so that we're getting it in the right direction, and that includes social prescribing, where we want to roll it out in a phased way and win acceptance of it by both patients and by the professions. And from that, then work out, or not ages later, but do that and work out how will we measure the impact of that, both in terms of the qualitative measures and how people feel about it, but on quantitative measures. So a small example is the one I gave earlier about the blood pressure monitoring in East Kilbride, because they have produced data that is not only about how the patients engaged in that felt, about the ease of access to look after their own health, the impact it had on them, checking their own blood pressure and seeing it change because they took certain steps, which were all about social prescribing, as well as the data, the harder data at the GP end in terms of drug prescribing and so on for those particular conditions, if you like. So there's work for us to do on some of those harder and softer measures, but we need to get the focus of some of that work in the right direction and building the measures behind it.
Just to clarify, I totally agree with that sort of targeted approach there. But just for clarification here, is the government's objective then to look at targeting those kind of services, making sure that there's that accessibility around a wide range from social prescribing to all sorts of other, and then put a set of criteria in place that is measurable outcomes to the health of that population? Is that just to clarify?
That is exactly the work that Richard Foggo is undertaking. And it also links back to one of your earlier questions, which is about cross-portfolio. Because some of the accessibility of actions that we all need to take in order to look after our own health better are questions of accessibility that link into local government provision, the availability of consumables in areas of deprivation and housing, whether you've got enough shops, the right shops, which licensed premises have you got, and so on and so forth. So there's a range of steps that need to be taken.
Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. It came up on the earlier session about the pace of change in relation to technology advances and implementing digital platforms and supporting people. And I know that when people talk about transformational change, it can take a long time. My previous NHS colleagues can say that transformational change can take up to 10 years. So I just wonder if you're, are you content with the pace of change? And, for me personally, I know as a previous healthcare employee that change can be frustrating for many if it doesn't happen quick enough. So I guess it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on the pace of change.
So I think your time frame is broadly right. Transformational change, genuinely transformational change, is something that runs in a 5 to 10 year timeline, and I think it is it's wrong to think it can happen any quicker. There are two. So I am never content, if I'm perfectly frank, with the pace of change. Generally speaking, because I'm quite impatient as a person, but also because I am frustrated when I see good practice not replicated, and I am impatient with talk of sharing good practice when I just want people to implement it and stop talking about it. But I also know that the only way you secure sustainable change is if you take people with you. You don't secure it by diktat or instruction. So we need to get the balance right. And one of the things that is clear, I'm sure you know this, one of the things that's clear in the health service is peer-to-peer work is hugely successful. So one of the big changes we've seen, and the Atlas of Variation builds on that, it started with orthopaedics and orthopaedic surgeons looking together, doing auditing of their work and the length of stay of their patients, the length of time in operations, the devices they used, looking then at who were the outliers and improving their practice as a consequence. That's the kind of core that sits underneath the CMO's Atlas of Variation and is then taken and used in that way. GP clusters is a comparable approach where clusters of GPs come together and learn from each other and innovate and develop and implement good practice. So there is a balance to be struck between my drive to increase the pace of change, and I do not think it is fast enough yet, with the absolute imperative that you have to take people with you, and they have to lead that change in many ways if it is to be sustainable. Politicians are here today, gone tomorrow, but clinicians are with us for a very long time. Advanced nurse practitioners, physios, leaders in social care are with us for a career. So they need to be absolutely in that leadership role and convinced that the change that they are making is one that improves the outcome for those that they are working with. So it is a balance. I think there are some things that we can do faster, which is why that ministerial strategy group has a very absolute set of recommendations coming out of the review, very tight timescale, and a real focus on some of the work that is, if you like, the minimum that needs to be delivered across all our IJBs and health and social care partnerships. Health boards have a critical role in their end of that, local government in their end. So there is some areas of change where you can pursue it faster. But overall in the transformation, it is a process of taking people with us by negotiation, by persuasion, by looking at the levers that we can use. The GP contract is a good example of a lever that you can use to facilitate change.
And the Once for Scotland digital strategy was talked about earlier as well, as far as making a more national approach to digital. And so for me, that, you know, I have issues obviously as a rural South Scotland MSP, that we need to make sure that there isn't any inequality that is then occurs because of rural versus urban. So are you also happy that the approach that's been applied across Scotland will reduce the variation across health boards, maybe in some of the digital, in the digital application?
Yes, I am. That's its absolute intent, and we need to get away where we do have the capacity to direct pace of change, if you like. We need to get away from this notion that what happens in Health Board X inevitably has to be different from Health Board Y, even though by and large the population cohort that they are serving is not that markedly different. That's why in previous discussions with this committee I have talked very much about health boards as the delivery arm of the NHS in Scotland, not as autonomous bodies. So there are areas where we can secure faster change, but overall those who will deliver it have to be brought with us.
Thank you very much. Brief final supplementaries, Brian Whittle.
Yeah, just to over this piece, we've heard from a variety of stakeholders who are looking at the ownership of the data should be with the patient. And that's fairly universal, apart from the BMA, funny enough, surprisingly. And I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary thinks that the sort of transfer of ownership would facilitate that data sharing among relative professionals, and probably perhaps tackle the issue of GDPR and how that gets in the way of a more free-flowing information.
So my view absolutely is that the ownership of the data should be with the patient. As far as I'm concerned, the data that is held on my medical records is my data. Now, I understand clinical anxiety and concern around that, and anxiety that the way in which the data is kept and its content could, by a layman, be misinterpreted and misunderstood. And we need to work our way through that, because we need to get to a point where data sharing is much less of a big deal, I can't think of another way of putting it, than it is at the minute. Now, there is some work that is underway. I'll ask my colleague to talk about that, which is the sharing of the emergency medical record, which will make a difference in terms of pharmacy and so on. So it's one of these ones where step by step You need to take account. It's partly what I said to Ms Harper about people need to come with us. So that means that if people are saying, no, we don't want to do that, you need to understand, why do you not want to do it? What are the concerns that you have that we can overcome and reassure you on? And then you may be entirely with us, you're reassured, or there may be some concerns left where we're never going to agree, so we're just going to have to do it. Before I pass to my colleague about where we've got to on the emergency medical record, the example I would give is actually from Social Security. So Social Security, as you know, in terms of taking over responsibility for disability payments, one of the things that is absolutely committed to is a reduction in the individual medical assessments that need to be done. Part of that involves being able to confirm an individual's condition from a third party, which could be their GP. So there was an initial discussion with the BMA around that, where there was considerable concern about this other public agency accessing medical records and medical information. That's been worked through. It is circumscribed. There are clear protocols about who gets information, exactly what information do they get, what do they not get, how is it used, but most importantly, where is the individual seeking that support's permission in all of that. So there are ways through some of these concerns, but you need to take time and work your way through them. Can I just...
I think with a view to time, we'll perhaps ask your team to provide a note on the emergency medical record after the event. I had one further brief supplementary from Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Convener. And I suppose if the officials could maybe write to us on this, because it leads to Emma Harper's question in terms of a GP transformation fund. How has that actually been utilised across Scotland, the different IJB specifically? Because I know here in Edinburgh, my own, that money has been used to reduce debt, not to actually do the work to transfer GP surgeries, and funding, which I think the Health Board estimated to be about 60 million would be needed going forward. So just interested to find out actually when government think this money is going to be spent on transformation, it's actually used to sometimes take debts down.
Well, that would be of some concern. I don't think there is separate funding in terms of premises that I alluded to earlier. We'll certainly write to you on where we are with the Primary Care Transformation Fund, which I think is what you're referring to, and the information that we have to date. We will make sure you have that.
Emma Harper.
Just a final quick thought. We took evidence, oral evidence from Dr Carrie Lunan, who's the chair of the Royal College of GPs in Scotland, and she talked about asking for a national programme to educate people about changes in primary care, but also then what are the changes in, what does multidisciplinary team mean, and AHPs. So you could even write back to us about that. It's like what update is being provided to inform people nationally?
Yeah, there's quite a detailed programme of work going on that involves our Royal College of General Practitioners, so we will write to you with that detail.
Thank you very much. And finally, Cabinet Secretary, when do you anticipate the National Integrated Health and Care Workforce Plan will be published?
It will be published by the end of this year.
Thank you very much.
I wonder, Convener, if your colleagues would care to just drop me a line about all the things that I've said that we will write to you on. I know my colleagues will have taken a careful note, but that would be a help.
I can assure you that you will get a note to that effect. And can I thank you and your team very much for your time this morning and afternoon. It's been very helpful. Thank you very much. We will now move into a private session.